Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our live Q&A. This week, it's the week of January 27th, the last week. We are going to be streaming of January before we move into the second month of the year already and getting closer and closer to Maul Shadow Lord, which we are going to talk about in this stream because that is the biggest news that has come out of the week. Star Wars continues to kind of populate the news cycles here recently. Not necessarily the biggest news week ever for Star Wars, but still some good stuff to talk about. We did do a trailer reaction if you want to see our first original thoughts on Maul Shadow Lord, but we're going to talk about the trailer with you guys, get to see what you guys thought of it, what you think of the release schedule and strategy around Maul Shadow Lord, the fact that it's coming out over 5 weeks, 2 episodes every week, ending on May 4th. We're going to talk about that, some of the details they released in the article about the different characters and the setting and all of that type of stuff, and a few other news stories that have popped up over the past week. The biggest one, including Taika Waititi, who surprisingly has been in the news talking about his Star Wars movie. This came out yesterday, and we talked a little bit about it last week. Kathleen Kennedy in her exit interview talking specifically about that movie when that one has been seemingly dead for years, and we haven't heard anything about it really since that investors meeting in 2020 when they reiterated and officially confirmed, I believe, that he was working on it. Since then, there's been almost nothing from it, and she did confirm that it was actually in a stage that was kind of greater than Dawn of the Jedi, and maybe even Rey's New Jedi Order, because she never talked about that. And Filoni's movie we've now heard is on the back burner. So it sounded like from her discussions that it's not a priority, but it's something they are still active with. And now this week, Taika's come out and gotten to talk about his movie a little bit. So we're going to talk about what he said about his film, whether we think this means it's any closer to actually coming out, and whether it still might happen or not. So we're going to discuss all that. As always, this is a live Q&A, so make sure you put your comments in the chat. We are going to take your questions. As always, it is our typical chat rules. First come, first serve. We are taking 2 per person, then cycling back through. So again, you could send more than 2, but we will get to other people's and then go back to yours. Time permitting, we will get to as many as we can. Like to keep this stream a little bit shorter this week because the last few we've done have been kind of supersized episodes. Last week we did an extra big episode because of the huge news of Kathleen Kennedy leaving and the fact that our stream failed on Tuesday. So we were trying to get as many people in as possible with the makeup stream last Wednesday. This week, probably stick closer to that hour and a half mark. That is our target every time. And recently, we've been going back over it. So we're trying to get back to that manageable hour and a half stream. So make sure you get those questions in. Super chat is the way you can get priority chat access. If you want to send in a super chat, you guarantee your question on the stream tonight, and we will answer it immediately once we are done with whatever we are currently talking about. You can also join Patreon or YouTube memberships. If you're of a certain tier, you can get priority chat access as well. If you're on YouTube memberships, you should just see that perk pop up. If you are on Patreon, you have to let us know what your handle is on YouTube, and then we will look for your chats and give you priority chat access as well. All right, let's get into the main topics of the stream tonight. And let's start out with Maul Shadow Lord, because it is the biggest thing of the week. Maul Shadow Lord officially got its first trailer. Almost a year ago, we got a leaked trailer about 9 months ago at Star Wars Celebration. And it was a pretty complete package, and which was kind of shocking for us, especially having seen it, that nothing came out of Maul Shadow Lord until now, because it seemed really far along. It wasn't like they were just showing, 1 or 2 tidbits. It was a full trailer with full, stills as well that they showed. They showed off a ton of stuff at Celebration in April of 25. And now here we are at the end of January 2026, and we're getting our first full trailer for Maul. They also dropped a cool poster as well, and we got confirmation that the show is going to be dropping on April 6th. They are, like I said at the beginning, going to do 2 episodes a week drop. So every week for 5 weeks from April 6th to May 4th, they are dropping 2 episodes as we get through the 10 episode series, which is a little shorter than they've done recently with their full length seasons for The Bad Batch. The Bad Batch, I believe, season 1 and 2 were both 16 episodes, and the last one was 15, with the finale being an hour long, which is kind of a two-parter if they would have split it up that way. So it is a little bit shorter in terms of episode length. I would imagine the episodes are still going to be in that 24 to 25-minute range of a typical animated show. Maybe the finale or the premiere are a little longer. Bad Batch season 1 did have an hour-long premiere, and Bad Batch season 3 did have an hour-long finale. So they could, if they wanted to go one of those directions, have a supersized episode one week. But I would imagine with the 2 episode drops, it's basically like you're getting in 45 minutes to 50 minutes of Star Wars animation every week. I would imagine one of the episodes is not going to be that length, but we found out a ton of stuff about it, including the trailer. It looked pretty awesome. Clone Wars animation style, plus with a little bit of flair, kind of some After Effects, some really cool touch ups. They've really talked a lot this week about how they went all in on the visuals and the cinematographer and the way they plan their shots and all of that stuff. It sounds like they put a lot of heart and soul and passion into making this look awesome too, not just be a continuation of the typical Clone Wars animation style we've seen. But Sonic, now a week removed almost from the trailer, what are your continued thoughts on Maul Shadow Lord now here going on a week after the trailer came out?
I mean, again, to reiterate just some of the things I've said in the teaser trailer reaction, I'm not a huge fan of this being only 5 weeks. Like, yes, I think we are trying to equate that Maul is probably one of the most well-known iconic characters of the prequels, despite only being in 1 film and not really having any lines of dialogue. But clearly people have heard about, like, the Kenobi meme, like, random people I always see making edits at and all, so clearly his animation life has really outgrown not a little bit of the source too, like, he was a huge drawing point for season 7 of the Clone Wars. He definitely elevated Twilight of the Apprentice in the season 2 two-parter of Rebels onwards, just was a great character. I mean, everybody somehow has seen the Kenobi versus Maul final fight on Tatooine, even if they haven't seen Rebels, and it's also referenced in, like, the tease for the teaser trailer too, so it's clear that Lucasfilm is aware and the fandom is aware about his stature as a character, what he's grown outside of the films, but they still are treating him as like a film-esque character. And that's fine for me. If you really want him to be like now that we've gotten like the Daredevil trailer to be like the next guy up for a little shorter of a window, but before the Mandalorian and Grogu release comes out, that's fine. I'm sure we're gonna have something for May 4th as well. I know this is ending on May 4th. I just don't see us not having some sort of shorts or Tales of the Jedi, or maybe even that's when Vision starts dropping the Night Jedi series or something. Who knows, right? But I don't see them losing momentum with the show and like even taking like 2 weeks off before the movie really kicks into gear. But yeah, I'm hoping that this is a repeat in some ways of last year at this time in May, right when we were watching Andor, and it's like, yeah, it's not great to have these weird 3 episode drops per night. It's not great for creators like herself per se, but the spin of that is like, well, guys, like we structured the story around that, right? And I'm hoping that maybe despite this being animation, still being more teenage oriented than it is necessarily adult oriented or all family oriented like the live action shows are, this could possibly, because of the tone, just be like, "Hey, we're gonna give you, like you said, 45 minutes every week." Structurally, like, is its own arc, or is a really big chunk of the story told very serialized? Whatever way they want to approach it, I'm fine as long as they're using that structure and that time effectively, right? I think like this is not going to be something like the Acolyte where we feel like, oh, okay, it feels like we were watching one episode and then we're seeing another part and we had to wait a week between, and it feels like, we're straddling between 30 minutes when this is live action. It should feel like we're padding our length out and really getting character moments and action. This is animation. We know that at the end of the day, it's a very tight pipeline. It's a very long process compared to even live action and stuff with the volume. But we do think that, hey, we can at least go and play around with the story and the limitations or the structure of how we looked at animation so far, because this is a character that somebody in 2020 has fallen in love with because of Clone Wars, because they were like, I've seen him in episode 1, and then they've grown out their love for, and they've grown with the character. They've grown up with Maul in a way, in a second wave, in a sense, right? So hopefully they're like, yeah, let's see if animation can almost support these part 1, part 2 sort of episodes and just drop them at once so that people can, take that break if they need it, if they only got that 30 minutes before going to bed or something. But if they're committed to watching more, they're super enticed by the cliffhanger of that first part, go into the second. That's how I hope they handle it. And I feel like that's what'll at least minimize some of this shortened window. If people are like hearing like, whoa, like it's at part 2 you gotta watch. Oh, it's like, no, like every time, every week, it's like that second part of the episode, as great as the first one is, it takes it to another level, right? And it really concludes certain things. If they can nail that for at least the majority of those 5 weeks, I think Maul has a little bit more runway and probably has like a 1 or 2 week extension past its, final conclusion for season 1, hopefully, and sets you up really nicely for whatever comes next, and definitely for Mandalorian and Grogu. So yeah, I mean, I still don't love it. I love the animation. I love, like, the matte paintings, the glass touches on the lightsabers and all. I love the development of the style and all, but not loving the developments with the release schedules these days, I'll say that.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, especially when we've been waiting as a Star Wars fandom, we've been waiting so long for consistent Star Wars television. And yes, this is a post Disney Plus issue. Before we had no Star Wars television, so it is a recent development that we've gotten so accustomed to Star Wars TV. But since 2019, we haven't really had to wait more than 6 months to a year between long running Star Wars TV shows. And now our last two releases that have come out have been truncated. They've been shrunk down. The conversation hasn't really been around them. The last time we've really had serious, widespread discussion on a Star Wars TV show was, I would say, Acolyte, because Skeleton Crew didn't hit with the audience the same way. It didn't have as many people watching. So Acolyte, despite having poor viewership numbers towards the end, still there was a conversation around Acolyte, and or had that, but it was brief, and it was kind of a about a 4 week period, starting with Star Wars Celebration, continuing with the Revenge of the Sith re-release, and then powering into May 4th and Andor starting to wrap up, and then continuing 2 weeks after May 4th when Andor wrapped up. So as a Star Wars fan, and especially as being part of the Star Wars fandom that likes to talk about all this stuff, and obviously we get in front of the camera and get to discuss it with all of you, it is a disappointment that it's only 5 weeks long, because I think all of us have been really looking forward to this show. But if it is how they plotted it and it's best for the story, then I can't wait for a good story. That's the non-Star Wars content creator fandom in me, is just excited for a good story. If they want to tell it this way, then great. It's just not the way they've traditionally told animation. So I'm interested with this season, especially with the way they've described it so far. It really does seem like something that's very insular. It's all going to take place in this city. It seems like it's going to really have a specific character dynamic we really haven't seen in Star Wars animation. Probably the closest thing would be the Tales of series, but those are only 3 episodes for each of their characters rather than 10. So, and those are also like 15 minutes. So I think it's going to be some type of bridge in between the more traditional seasons of Star Wars television we've gotten on Disney Plus, i.e. Clone Wars season 7, Bad Batch, and the Tales of. So it seems to be right in the middle. I know one of the conversation points I posed on the trailer reaction was Does this mean Maul's a one and done? Does this mean this specific show's maybe a one and done, and then it continues in another form later on with a different title once he maybe has kick-started his criminal syndicate by the end of this, when he starts the Crimson Dawn and we start to see all those chips play out. How do those pieces fold into the remainder of the story? It'll be really interesting to see, because I think when they originally announced this, a lot of us assumed it was going to be at least a 2-3 season show that showed the progression of Maul as a crime lord. I think that's what their aim is, but it does definitely seem like it's going to be very character focused rather than more of a take on the broader crime syndicate world that a show with a 16 to 20 episode range might have given. But I think there's probably a lot of data based reasons for the 10 episode length. I would imagine they're basing it off of other things they've put on Disney Plus, and they think that 10 episodes in 5 weeks is going to get the most bang for their buck. I'm sure they have some data that backs that up, and if that's where we're going, I'm good with it, because Maul Shadow Lord isn't the biggest show of the year. Ahsoka's the biggest show of the year. We'll see how they strategize that show, considering these last two releases have been so truncated. Will Ahsoka get a similar treatment? Maybe if Maul is a huge success, they're like, well, we have maybe don't have the long-term subscribership from Star Wars shows that we did originally with Mandalorian, but we're getting huge hits for a month, for 6 weeks. I could see them doing this for Ahsoka as well. So it's interesting to talk about this conversation as a whole, but let us know what you guys think of the Maul trailer in the chat. And we have a few conversations about that already in here. We got Brandon Tran, who said, do you think Maul Shadow Lord will be one of the best projects we've gotten since it's being done by Clone Wars writer Matt McNovitz, who has done the Umbara arc and 3 of Cad Bane's Underworld episodes? I think it absolutely could be. I mean, vibes wise from the trailer, this looks awesome. I think it looks like the most complete animated Star Wars project we've seen in a while. And what I mean by that is just that it has a specific tone, it has a specific style, it has a specific set of characters, and it seems to be really trying to keep to that. It doesn't look like, and again, it's one teaser trailer, it doesn't look like it has too many ambitions beyond the specific Maul story. And that's where people got frustrated with some of the episodes of Bad Batch, was that at times it felt like it wanted to commit to the larger Clone Wars world, tell stories with so many other characters, tell stories about the underworld, tell stories about the Jedi, tell stories about the clones. But at the heart and soul of the story, every time it got serious in the Bad Batch, it was about those characters. It was about the Bad Batch themselves. I think that's where a little bit of the disconnect between what season one seemed to tease for the audience was, and ultimately what it became by season 2 and 3. Maul Shadow Lord doesn't look like that. It looks like it's saying, hey, this is a Maul show. It's going to be violent. It's going to be dark. It's going to have the crime stories. It's going to have some element of police procedural, and it's going to have uh, obviously the Force and the dark side and him tempting a new apprentice and all that type of stuff. I feel like this teaser was probably our most honest look at Maul that we could have gotten, and I'm really hoping it sticks with that direction, because it to me it was everything I could have wanted after out of a Maul show, because Maul as a character, especially, he's so much of his story has been told. We know where he ends up. We know he becomes one of the top crime bosses in the entire galaxy by the time of Solo. We know that he dies in Rebels. We know where he was in Clone Wars. So there's so much of his story told. You could get trapped in kind of the prequel syndrome if you try to tell too much of an important story or too much of a grandiose story, because the stakes aren't necessarily there. But when you keep it more contained, when you introduce new characters, when you put Maul up against other people, yes, we know he will ultimately succeed, but does he succeed initially? How do we get there? I think that's the interesting stuff that they've set up in the show, and I'm frankly really excited for this. A lot more excited than I thought I would have been back when the teaser came out at Celebration. And as the years gone on, I've gotten more and more excited just for the possibility of a Maul show, but this made me even more excited than I originally was when they announced it.
I mean, you make a great point, Brandon, about Mishnowitz being the one to adapt the ideas of Filoni and is really that big lead writer for Tales of the Underworld and the Umbara arc, right? I mean, Umbara alone already gives me like great sense of like just how dark and twisted this can get. Yeah, but Underworld was surprising for us. I think especially the Cad Bane stuff was very surprising because that was the one I remember both of us in the lead up were like, it's like the whole Han Solo syndrome of like, do you really need to know this character's origin and how he got there? Like, young Han Solo works in the books because it's almost so disconnected from stuff at the very beginning. And then by the time you get to that final book of Rebel Gambit, like you're like, okay, like yeah, I've built its own little sub universe. And then Solo, it does its own thing, but it really feels like it takes like a mixture of all that stuff in the 3 books and then kind of emphasizes more like the aesthetics of the character with the Falcon, with Lando, and with the gun and his name instead of like focusing more on the arc that changed and transformed him, right? And did we really need either? I mean, I think people can say they love the AC Crispin's Han Solo trilogy, but is it super necessary? Probably not. It's very underrated, and a lot of people haven't read it. Did we need the solo movie? Probably not. But I think we love the fact that Crimson Dawn is a big thing in storytelling. Love seeing Maul show up again. We did like to see the recast characters, even if Kathleen thinks that is a bit of a mistake or too early in her exit interview. But I think when you look at that all those considerations with such a bigger character, Cad Bane, you're like, "Well, why do I need him? He's an animated character." Like, once you spell out every detail about him, where's the mystery? Where's the aura for that character, right? And luckily, they handled it in a really, really strong way. I mean, definitely leaning on the inspirations of, like, having this be told as, like, a split storyline between 2 orphans, one turned good lawman and one turned, bad gangster, and riffing heavily on like stories of those from like 70s Boston era and then a lot of Western mixes put together. Very smart just to lean more on those inspirations and then allow another original character to kind of help shape Cad Bane without using Cad Bane's POV every single minute of those episodes. That was really good. So I think that already alleviated a lot of my concerns, taking something that should have been relatively boring or like overdone, kind of like how we saw with Tales of the Empire, with what we saw out of Barris's character. I'm like, we're jumping too much. I want to see more details or no details about this. And then what we got with obviously, um, I'm blanking on Morgan Elsbeth, yeah, and her story where it's like, did we really even need the origin? Like, it was also that same question, and it was like, well, now that I got it, I don't really care too much about that 3rd episode in comparison to the first 2, which, have their moments. So, definitely excited for Mishnovitz really being here as his lead. Like you were saying, Liam, the scope doesn't necessarily have to be insane. Like, we're hearing everything be on Janix. Sure, a lot of these animation trailers especially only really show off, like, the first 4 or 5 episodes max and maybe, like, 1 tease from the later half of the season. But even if we're leaving Janix, I'm assuming we're just gonna be, like, in the Janix system. It seems like he's really trying to build something out from here, especially because this is not a place that has had full Imperial control quite yet. It's been, like, the negotiation between the criminal underworld and these, like, independent lawmen out here, right? So I'm excited. I think it can keep its scope limited to just setting up, like, the very beginnings of Crimson Dawn or making him a crime lord that can then draw, Crimson Dawn while he remains in the background. The big thing for me is, like, I do want to at some point get as to why he's on Malachor, like, what has shaped him to become somebody stuck on Malachor. Now that we have this new character, Devin, whom people think is Talon, like, is that something that is like a continuous thing between multiple seasons or like multiple different spin-off shows leading into that? That's a big question. Or is it just, is this something where she like disappears for a season or a show and then comes back in the 3rd when he's a little bit more dealing with the arcane stuff with the Force and trying to fight that way while his Crimson Dawn is working self-sufficiently without him and he's only there just to intervene and be imposing, right? Those are the questions I have. But as far as what we have here in this first season, you're going with one of the best writers that Clone Wars has ever produced, and I think especially with the material and like I mentioned before, as all kind of aged up a little bit, kind of looking to see like good reasons for us to be like immediately drawn to animation. Going for something that's more of a TV 14 vibe for Darth Maul and can push the boundaries a bit more and stay in a little bit the murkier grays of the story as opposed to good versus bad, right? Like a lot more traditional Star Wars can be. Yeah, I think we've got a really strong match made in heaven here, and hopefully the release schedule supports that as well.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said too, and I think the interesting thing, and this will go to the next question we have about this, which is from a critical thinker as well. The interesting thing about the Devon character, whether she becomes Talon or not, is like you said, we don't know what happens to her. What could she we know Kira takes Crimson Dawn moving forward into the original trilogy because we've seen that in the comics, and then we've seen that in something like Outlaws. We've seen those stories continue into the future. But do they get back to the original idea of bringing Talon in from Legacy into the main Star Wars continuity by maybe keeping her alive past the original trilogy, maybe even past the sequel trilogy, and then she shows back up in something later? What if she's one of the antagonists in something like Starfighter or something like what we're getting from Kinberg? Could she live on and be a big part of that? I think part of that would have to do with the reception overall, but that would go back again to the Lucas sequel ideas and be interesting if they did something like that. But Critical Thinker asks, Shadow Lord trailer looks good. Hopefully they do something unique with Talon rather than having her predictably stay good or the usual Order 66 survivor tropes. Ideally, it'd be nice to have Talon survive the show and be an antagonist to the original heroes. But one, Disney is allergic to them. And two, if Talon is successfully apprentice to Maul, why did he want Ezra? Uh, I think we could see her maybe be part of the upending of Maul. That's again another piece of story we don't know. We don't know how Maul goes from top of the crime world, running Crimson Dawn, to being stuck on Malachor. So we don't know what happens to him. And so that's another big chunk of Maul's life that we still have to figure out. But I agree that the trailer looks really good. Again, they are not calling this character Talon yet. It's Devon, but I mean, it looks like Talon. It looks like Maul's tempting her to the dark side. I wouldn't be shocked if her name's Devon, and then Maul says, "Oh, just like me, you have to take a name when you come to the dark side." And she picks Talon at the end of the show, and it's one of the big reveals. Uh, the probably one of the worst kept secrets in the show. I wouldn't be shocked about that if they did that. But I would love to see her move on. I actually didn't even read your second comment when I just made that point. I read your first one about Talon. Um, but yeah, I would love to see her go on. I'd love to see her continue to be a part of things if she's a good character, obviously. Again, we'll have to see, but I have all the confidence in the world in them crafting character through animation. They've all been really great in pretty much every show they've done. They've done a great job of building character, especially with original characters. So we shall see, but I think it would be something cool to see her continue on to the future and have these remnants of a show like this. Again, another connection to animation. And well, I think we're back. We dropped there for a few seconds. Hopefully
We should be
we're all
back now.
good. Um, but yeah, just finishing the point, I think Talon would be completely fine as a character in the sequels, or post-sequel timeline. I think it would be really cool to connect with animation, and with Dave Filoni back, you have a really strong possibility of more animation connecting, and this time, Maul Shadow Lord is probably something you don't have to have seen to watch another live action thing if they wanted to do that like you did, with Ahsoka, where you kinda had to have at least seen Rebels.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your point, critical thinker, about like, this could be a pretty predictable turn, like against Maul at some point if he really is talent and, is trained up and all like that. I'm just not entirely convinced because again, it is the writer, Mishnovitz. Like I think he has proven that he can work alongside in parallel tropes. He can sidestep some of those pitfalls in general. I don't know. It's a tough one because I want to say that we don't necessarily even have to have her like be in line with Maul while still staying dark. Like she could be twisted by him and then like try to do more. And like this is a guy you have to remember, timeline wise, it okay, I know what you're saying, it's very likely, but I'm again, hear me out here. I don't think it has to be a rehash of a corruption arc. It could be a thing where it's like it becomes like a little bit too unstable, right? Like maybe he starts corrupting her. She finds that alluring and powerful talent, especially in those comics. She's not someone who like really holds back. She uses everything as a weapon. Her lightsaber skills, obviously, she's seduction, she does everything. Like she is someone that's a little unhinged even by like one sit standards in a lot of ways. And maybe if you're considering the time period that we're at, Maul has only very recently been thrown around on Mandalore and smacked to the floor and shot up with lightning. It's barely escaped his master, saw Talzin die. And all this has happened. And then on top of that, season 7 of Clone Wars with Siege of Mandalore and how that goes wrong and how he's willing to just die instead of seeing the birth of this new empire without him at its place, at its power, right? And yes, I think he's like, things can be shattered, things can break, right? Like empires can be broken, but it's not because he's like, I want to be a do-gooder. It's like I want to take control of the chaos and the advantage. But if someone like Devin slash Talon, right, starts growing into someone who's like trying to become like a full-blown Sith, perhaps, who's to say that like he would support that? Maybe he like loses control of her, maybe she gets herself killed, right? I think that'd be a pretty interesting thing to see because right now we've seen how like he's so very level-headed with Ahsoka and his offer in season 7 of like join me and we can stop this from happening, all that, right? And how he is in Rebels is a little different. He's a little bit more of the master manipulator. He is more of like, I'm gonna play the role. I'm gonna, just be a little bit of weak, frail old man, and then starts teasing and enticing Ezra that way, right? And before the full reveal and all that comes. So is that just something he just flicks a switch on? No, I think this could be a character that he probably like learns to get away from, like that more straightforward sense when it's not working for him, maybe unlocks something and finds and picks at her weaknesses, has more time with her, obviously, with the situation that they're in on Janix, possibly that other Jedi is her master and dies or something, and Mom maybe actually is trying to help her, and then he dies, right? Like there's so many different contexts and situations that can make her have like a very crazy corruption that just gets out of hand, right? I know animation tends to simplify things in storytelling, but because this is Maul, because he's gonna be the POV, because he's always, especially in animation, existed more in the darker grays than, outright black or white, I think there is a strong possibility that her character can become something totally unique where he learns from it and he's like, "Okay, maybe I shouldn't push these buttons," but certain things about, like, how I approached her, when to approach her, I can use for Ezra, right? So I could see that, I could see that. Maybe his goals are like, "I want you to replace Savage for me in a way, right? And hand in hand for me this with this criminal empire structure." But for her, she's like, "No, I'm here to like, take my place rightfully by Palpatine and take over the throne." And maybe this is how Vader starts, hunting him down, right? Maybe she becomes too appealing at one point, and Vader's like, I'm de facto number two. Like, who's this? Who you been trained by? There's only one person, Maul, and that's why we have that whole insinuation too that Maul is terrified and has seemingly had some encounter with Vader as well before he gets trapped or is maybe directly caused to be trapped on Malachor by Vader, right? So I'm not gonna say it won't necessarily be like more of like that Order 66 turns and arcs and like those same sort of tropes. I just think that we have a writer and the way this is only 10 episodes and full action packed. I just don't see it being like, oh, we go from straight good to conflicted to bad and then unravels within 10 episodes, right? There's no guarantee that this gets a season 2 anyways, so whatever story's told here, I'd like it to be as different and open-ended as possible, and I think that character, with those expectations of the fandom, with those expectations from previous animation projects, maybe we're building up too much of which way she can go instead of letting her just thrive as her own character.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into the next comment about Maul Shadow Lord from HD GameTube, who says, I feel like this show could be more mainstream than the other animated shows. Notice how they let everyone know it's made by the Clone Wars team when we already knew that. Also, the trailer got the same amount of views in like 5 days that the Bad Batch season 1 trailer got in 4 years. And I think you're right. I mean, I think they've retooled what their original idea was for animation in the post Bad Batch season 1 world, right? I think they went with Bad Batch because it was an idea they originally had coming off of Clone Wars. They had stuff ready for it. They had the models that they had just used for the season 7 animation. They decided, let's go with it. Well, because of the COVID bump that everything got that was released between 2020 and early 2022, mid 2022, Bad Batch came out in mid 2021 on Star Wars Day. And I think it got so much more viewership than they expected, especially in season 1, that they were like, this is it. We're gonna do more Bad Batch, and they had already gotten started on a season 2, but I think they fast tracked the season 2. They really went in on it, and then season 2 disappointed in viewership because it was now away from that bump, and then they finished the show with season 3. But I think since season 2, they've been looking for what do we do with animation because they've had 2 seasons of their 4 big seasons they have had on Disney Plus be huge hits with Clone Wars season 7 and Bad Batch season 1. I think they wanted to get back there as much as possible. And the best way I think they felt to do that is to do something that's incredibly tied to Clone Wars, to use this animation style they've put so much money into already and kind of perfected, and then also take a character that's not just indelibly tied to Clone Wars and Clone Wars fans, but also pretty much any Star Wars fan would recognize in Darth Maul, and that's their ploy. So I absolutely think they picked the show because they think it will attract a ton of viewership, and so far it's proving to be correct because it has exploded. It has been a big thing online. People are talking about it. People are excited for it. People who don't watch animation are excited for it. And I think that's ultimately their goal with this show is to just get people back interested in Star Wars animation. That's why I'm not 100% sure if it's a multi-season show or not. If I was them, I would make it a multi-season show because I think anytime you have a streaming service, you have to have like at least one thing that people can continually look forward to. And if you're trying to get other people interested in other animated projects that are a little less safe in the future, you need to have that like backbone project that people are already there for. So they're willing to give other things a shot. And it also has to be good, right? Maul's the perfect type of thing to do that. It's a safe show in terms of like viewership. It's safe to attract people to Darth Maul, but you can tell really compelling stories still with that character, and he is still beloved. So I think it's a smart decision. Hopefully, we'll see other things come out of it, and it's not just like only Maul all the time. As you guys know, every stream it feels like I talk about wanting more animation from Star Wars. There's no reason they shouldn't have more animation. Lucasfilm Animation itself is fairly small, but Disney is the biggest animation company in the world, and they own Lucasfilm Animation. They can get more animation going if they wanted to, but they haven't committed fully with Star Wars animation, especially since Bad Batch season 2. And I would just love to see more things come out of this. And I think I talked about in the trailer reaction, my idea originally that I put out when Bad Batch ended a few years ago was to make this Dark Times-esque show, basically in the vein of Clone Wars, where you cover the 20-year period with a bunch of different arcs from pretty much every character. You can have a Han Solo arc, you can have a Darth Maul arc, you can have a Star Killer arc, you could have any arc from anybody who lived in that time. a Luke arc, a Leia arc, but it almost seems like they maybe not as expansive as that, but they are doing something similar in that they are focusing on that time period and they're going to do a bunch of different seasons of different shows in that selective time period. And if Maul's a big hit, hopefully that leads to other things that maybe they wouldn't have tried if they can tie it back to Maul or the dark side or something that they deem a credible way to market it to larger audiences.
Yeah, and I'm seeing what you're saying, critical thinker too, about it being simplified or kiddified. When I say simplified, I mean it's just the nature of 20 minutes animation and like the pipeline of how that's developed, right? But like Liam is saying, these could be, like, collected into, like, almost like a Dark Times collection of shows, but these are shows that only have, like, a lifespan of a season or 2, but they help stretch into, like, other material in this time period leading into, obviously, the Andor and Rebels time period, right? I think that's more we're saying. As far as the kidified stuff, yeah, maybe Bad Batch you can say is kidified because it's very much family oriented. It is very much about clones, being fish out of water. Like, what does that mean now to not be a soldier in the Grand Army of the Republic and not be affected by the chips, and which they also got removed, right? And yeah, I wish it could have been darker. I wish there could have been more to it, more heft, right? There were still things in season 3, especially in this finale, that I felt was pretty dark, right? But I don't think we're not gonna get something morally murky with Maul. Everything with Maul has been really crazy and messed up. And yes, I know TV for PG was a thing for Clone Wars versus TVY7 for Disney XD, but this is streaming. They already brought back Clone Wars season 7 Maul, and you could say, oh, that's what George and Dave worked on, but Dave also still worked on this. So I don't think like that idea goes away that we can't have darker stuff, right? I think everything about Maul since he's appeared in Clone Wars, in Rebels, has been darker, right? He is always one of those characters that pushes the limits of like just how much can you show. So I wouldn't be surprised now being in this POV that we get a lot of that darker stuff. But I think it's gonna be more like it feels like it's drawn back a little bit because it is from his POV, it is mostly following him, and he's gonna have just justifications, right? Like, I mean, a very common storytelling concept is that no villain in a movie or book or show thinks that they're the villain, right? They have their reasons and justifications for everything that they're doing. But other people obviously will be, like, pointing out objectively, "This is bad. Objectively, this is harming people," and all that, but they're not gonna think like that. I don't think Maul at this point, especially without being a Sith, now that he's just simply going by Maul, is thinking like, "Oh, I have to really aim to be the biggest, baddest guy." He's like, "No, I'm aiming to just win, right? I'm aiming to take back what was stolen away from me, like, so many years ago," right? And what by whatever means can mean by whatever means. It doesn't necessarily even have to be the dark side way of winning things. He could do some things that are certainly like more good guy coded. Maybe like him and this lawman actually have positive interactions because he's trying to manipulate that situation while he grows out Crimson Dawn. Things like that can still happen, right? So yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I can say see here in what you're saying, but I am of the opinion, like Liam, that these are shows that we'll be able to grow out. We'll be able to tell more than what we got in these 3, 4 episode arcs between Clone Wars and Rebels, and have it be darker than what we got in Bad Batch, because that's just what this character entices us about. Like he has never been someone that you could see in like a young Jedi doing a little happy dance or something like that. It's Maul. There's nothing about this guy that isn't brutal to some degree. So I'm excited. I'm definitely excited for it, and I think we should be open to the idea that even if we don't get a Maul season 2 show, right? Maybe we jump to Path of the Jedi, maybe we jump into Clone Rebellion or something like that. We are still trying to possibly see animation move towards a direction where they are piecing together the steps leading to, like, the nadir, the very bottom point of the dark times, and then let that kinda settle for 2, 3 years before leading into stuff that we see in, like, Survivor, stuff that we're seeing in Kenobi, the stuff that we're seeing in Rebels and Andor, and when the rebellion is starting to actually have more unified movements, and it's not just these Clone Wars hagglers and prequel era leftovers.
Yeah, and I really just don't see. I'm agreeing with HD. Like, I just don't see the show being anywhere near the same tone of as Bad Batch. And Bad Batch did take itself seriously when the main story was going on. I think it's more of the side episodes, the filler episodes, the side adventures that were more kid friendly. It did have that kind of Clone Wars level, especially in season 3. I mean, you had the whole like basically child enslavement subplot, and they're doing experiments on them. Like there were some dark things in Bad Batch, but this trailer just didn't really speak to anything beyond it being a Maul show. And could they do what they've done to us the last couple times with some books recently and like pull the rug out from under us and say Maul's not actually quite the main character of the show. This detective is, and Maul is going to be the antagonist. Sure, they could, but I don't buy that from this show. I think that would be a huge disappointment, firstly. But I think if this show follows Maul, it's our first Star Wars TV show to follow a villain. This is gonna be dark. I think from the trailer, we already saw him cutting people in half. You know, the whole thing's about tempting Devin to the dark side, the whole monologue that covers the trailer. Uh, there's just a ton of stuff in this that just makes me think it's gonna be pretty true to what we've seen from marketing so far. So I have a lot of faith in this. I don't think Star Wars animation is the place for me to doubt them. There's a lot of other places for me to doubt the authenticity of like trailer to the prod screen what we get. But animation hasn't been a place that's really let me down in that regard. So I'm feel pretty confident in this project. And that's from somebody who's been a lot more skeptical in the last couple of years than than I used to be. But I feel really good about this one. I think this is going to be a good show. Continuing with Maul, and then we will get to the Taika topic and then your guys' other questions. Papa, we have not talked about Taika yet, so you joined just in time. Next up, we have, let's see, I think it was, I think we answered mostly all of these about Maul. So let's see, we have Brandon who says, "What if Maul ends up being TV-14 and ends up being a darker show?" I don't think there's any world in which it's TV-14, but it could be TV-PG. That's what Clone Wars was. TV-14 is like Family Guy, that level of kind of crassness. You don't usually see animation on that level unless there's a lot of blood and severe violence. Um, and I don't necessarily see that from this show. I think it's going to be like the edgier episodes of the Maul Clone Wars stuff. I think it's going to have darkness. It's going to have him decapitating people. It's going to have him cutting people in half. It's going to have him, backstabbing people and stealing from them and all that type of stuff. But I don't see it getting to another level to where it's like now see them getting shot and having blood. I mean, Star Wars never really had that type of violence. So I just don't see that. But I think it will be closer to that TV-PG level.
Yeah, I mean, the only character that we ever seen from a lightsaber bleed is in the cantina, and that still kind of doesn't really make sense, right? But we can head canon it away or whatever. But yeah, as far as what you're saying with TV-14, like Liam said, that is more reserved for shows that typically don't have this level of animation, so they make it up in voice acting, and that's where the crassness, that's where like the run-on sentences of just vulgarity kinda comes out, and then it's funny. It's really for those quick, quirky punchlines, but what we can see about this show is that, again, we don't really have any Jedi, like, just, like, very good characters. Even the most good character in this show probably might end up being that lawman, and I'm sure he'll do things that are, like, under the table to, like, keep the territory safe, to keep the calm, the peace. So we'll see stuff like that. I think people are also forgetting this is a streaming show. It's not like Cartoon Network when we had the first seasons of Clone Wars where they aired and then apologized Assad's killing, I think, Colt or someone on Camino and then
Mhm.
kissing him on the cheek and then, like, walking away, right? Like, they thought that was too far. On streaming, you can kinda get away with it, honestly. I could see them pushing what we think about TV PG being and not necessarily have the same exact timelines and restrictions as what we had when we had, like, that 8 PM Pacific Standard Time block for Clone Wars, when we were growing up and stuff. So I don't think it's out of the picture. I think it'll be a show that the true test of its darkness will really come forth through whatever happens to Devin, if she is truly following a her path and all that, seeing what makes her stand out from others and how her darkness happened, seeing what it's like to see what the Inquisitors and Rebels and what their actions were like, their personalities like. Vader, obviously, question more of those sort of questions, like what makes her stand out. And I think this again, because she'll always have this talent comparison, there are certain things about Talon that are very much like Azana that she's like, you don't know exactly what's going on in her head there, but then when she plays out her actions, you're like, oh my God, that's more twisted and messed up than I thought it could be. And I think we could see that progress, especially throughout the show, if she is getting corrupted by Maul and maybe even superseding some of his teachings in a quest for like stability, power, and like we said, it is a cancer. It starts corrupting, starts taking over. It'll be very interesting to see if that at some point, like, it all like, she loses the plot and everything kinda unwinds on Janix, and that forces him to change plans or abandon her, or something of that nature.
Yeah, and HD says, "I don't think they would introduce a Red Twi'lek and Maul in a Maul show and tease her being his apprentice and then not make her Darth Talon." I I I agree that that would be pretty ridiculous. I wouldn't put it past them. At least that's the type of stuff they've done in the past in order to, like, skirt around Legends and be like, "Yeah, this is basically Legends, but this is we're not gonna do the exact same thing, so we don't want to invite that exact comparison, but it almost is the exact same thing." So I wouldn't put it fully past them. I do agree, though. I think, like, everybody's gonna be like, "Come on, this is why change her name?" And it would be something that if they decide to, like, not name her Talon in season 1 and everybody's upset about that, I could see it in season 2 being something that they just make a plot point for her to officially become Talon unless they really wanna, like, bring Talon in later. Maybe they wanna bring Talon in her actual timeline, and this character, Devin, is the connection to Maul, and then Talon's like a descendant of Devin. Maybe you could do something like that. That would be the type of stuff they've done in canon before to try to connect to Legends, but
Duh, yeah.
I think this character's gonna just straight up be Talon by the end of the show.
It could be Mia Goth and Starfighter, right? That could be
Mhm.
someone that maybe takes over the Talon sort of character type without being so far removed from the legacy era, right? It still is like, okay, you're bumping her up, but at least it's not prequel era, but yeah, I mean, technically Devin is pink. I just don't think it's okay, what if I was about to say, what if Devin is Talon's sister and they're saving her for a big reveal? It could be, right? But I don't know. I just think that once you spend this time with this character, unless there's like a hidden twin situation that this trailer is not showing, it would just be like you'd have to enter Talon into the story as like already fully realized, and then the question is who trained her? She's self-taught. What are these like all these questions will naturally be there, not just for us as an audience, but Maul. And it's like, well, I didn't train you. Who taught you all this crazy stuff? Are you an Inquisitor that's been sent to like try to kill me or whatever, and been trained that way? Because I already know your methods, and they're just like how a clone trooper probably looks at those early stormtroopers as like inferior, maybe he looks at the Inquisitorius as inferior too, in a lot of ways, right? But yeah, I understand the concern about like, oh, maybe she's not gonna be who we think she is, but she's not gonna be Darth Talon, I'll tell you that, because I don't think we're gonna have a crate show up and dub her as Darth. I don't think Maul is gonna suddenly take on the Darth title again for like 2 years as like a breakaway Sith or something, right? She at most gets named Talon, and then we get to see and view this as a story of like this is what Talon's life could have been like in Lucas's version before she
Yeah.
became that version of Talon that he was planning for, as opposed to like, "Oh, this is gonna be the legacy Darth Talon." I don't think Lucas would have even committed to that idea anyways, because he was gonna just take the visuals of that character, which, let's be real, there's not a lot that she's wearing. I think that's definitely one of the big appeals for George Lucas, but yeah, I mean, what he saw out of Talon and Maul, we won't ever truly know, but I don't think he saw the legacy character, and he was like, "Yes, I want exactly that version." He was gonna make something else different here, and this is what we're gonna get, and this is probably the closest to that vision.
Yeah, absolutely. There was no way this is one to one to Legacy, no matter what. It's going to be maybe inspired by what Lucas was going to do with her, because we know that at least his ideas were written down at some point with what he was going to do. So I'm sure they still own those documents. I'm sure they can refer back to them. It's probably going to be around that direction, but still, regardless, it's going to be a Clone Wars version of that as well. So even if he had her going further than maybe Clone Wars would take her, it's going to be a animated TV version of that. So but yeah, a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. I think we've talked about Maul now for about an hour, so we'll still talk about it, obviously, but we should move into some of the other questions that were sent in at the top, and then also the Taika story. So keep sending in those questions. We want to keep talking to you about this, and we will try to get through as many as we can tonight. So the first question that was sent in, we got to was Brandon. So next up, we have Critical Thinker who said, "Who do you think will be writing the mainline Star Wars comic book after Alex Segura leaves? Who would your ideal pick be, and who's your realistic pick?" It's a great question. I think somebody who's fairly realistic to me would be Greg Pak. We've seen that transition from Vader to the Star Wars book before with Charles Soule, with Kieran Gillen. I think that would be a kind of the normal Star Wars Marvel Comics pipeline type of writer to come on board. Also, Greg Pak is an excellent comic writer, like arguably more acclaimed than almost anybody else they've had working on Star Wars comics. Now, his Darth Vader series, I liked a lot at times, didn't like at other times. I think it was very much so hampered by a lot of the events they ran during his Vader run. But I think he has better Star Wars stories in him than his Vader run. And I think he could handle something pretty interesting in the main line. That would be probably my realistic pick. If I wanted to go with who would be awesome, I'm going to look this person up to make sure they're still alive. But I think John Ostrander would be awesome. I mean, John Ostrander wrote the mainline Star Wars book for almost 20 years on and off. He really is one of the great comic writers ever. He is older now, obviously, so I don't know if he still wants to write comics, but he's somebody who I'd love to see return to Star Wars, even if it was for only like 12 issues. One of the architects of Legends, especially in the prequel era. So be really cool to see him return. Somebody who has been brought back to in the fold recently with the Living Force is John Jackson Miller, who's a really excellent comic writer as well. Wrote the KOTOR comic and wrote Knight Errant. So he's done a lot of cool stuff in comics. I would be interested in seeing him come back also. I don't know how much comics he's done recently. I don't know if that's if he's only exclusively doing novels now, but that would be a pretty cool dream pick as well. But I think my Greg Pak pick is maybe the most realistic one I've got for you.
Yeah, we're in this weird flux period where Marvel's like promised to get like an issue or two every month, but all these are going to be miniseries or like series that finish by 10. Like even what is it? The Kylo Ren Legacy of Vader one ended with like Kylo Ren will return. And I obviously it's going to be Soul picking it up next, and perhaps in the way we're talking about Maul, it's going to be like every series is like a semi reboot tonally, but it
Mhm.
still has the connective tissue of the stories. Maybe that's what Marvel's trying to imitate here, where they can be like, we'll commit to a little bit more exploration, more character focus, and tell that big chunk of the story. And if it's good, we'll go forward. If it's not selling well, or it just doesn't have good reviews, then we'll tamper it back and rework that into some crossover event or something where that story can be concluded, as part of a bigger thing. Right? Maybe things like that can happen. I I think any decision that happens with these writers comes well, it's already probably happened, but we'll know about it in May because that's when we're returning to Star Wars being a cinematic franchise again. And I wonder how much Mandalorian and Grogu is going to affect the comics. We've only gotten adaptations, but maybe they are trying to do like some tie-in comics, and maybe they're trying to move more stories closer to that period of the start of Mandalorian season 1. Like, maybe they're trying to see if we can invest a few miniseries to push that forward. But then even that, like, I'm not even sure if they're gonna commit to, like, a year of Mando and Grogu, because then the 50th anniversary is next May, right? And it's like, are we gonna restart? We've already heard about, like, some of these other, graphic novel books with, like, young Luke Skywalker and Biggs Darklighter that have been showing up that are gonna be there for the 50th anniversary. Hopefully, it's not just for, A New Hope, it's for the whole franchise that we start getting, like, storytelling done through comics and all these other multimedia, but, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough thing to, like, where Marvel is right now with, like, they're just not really committing to these long runs. The last period was overextended because of these events, because of publishing issues and all that. Yeah, I it's tough to say, right? So if we're gonna throw out names, I mean, most of the ones I wanted to throw out were told by Liam already. Um, I think if Guggenheim gets a chance again, I think he'd do even better than he did on Jedi Knights. I think the problem with Jedi Knights is it was definitely planned to be a much bigger series than it ended up being. Did we ever see that character? I haven't finished it yet, but did we ever see that character that was pitched by the Kenner toy line back in the day?
I don't know. I'm not caught up on that one either.
Okay, because I think he was supposed to be more like that big bad, a little bit more for a longer running story, but everything I was reading about, like, the individual issues, nobody really made a mention of him, right? So, that idea, like, this is a series that was meant to be longer, and it seems like halfway through, they're like, "We have to just wrap up these threads here." So, if he moves forward into another Marvel project, but gets to know, like, "Hey, you only have 10 or 12 issues, let's do it," right? Like, that's fine. But, I mean, yeah, like you said, John Jackson Miller, Ostrander, those are big names that I would enjoy for sure. Um, if I I'm gonna defend a little bit of the Segura arc. Like, I don't love a lot of the, like, middle issues, to be fair, but more of the recent ones I've actually kinda liked the camaraderie and the vibe of it. It really does feel like Aaron's early issue runs with, 2015 Star Wars to me now. Um, but, mm If we're gonna go for big swings, I think if they do something big swing wise, it'll happen around the anniversary, like, or the end of this year leading into next year. I would love, like, a Hickman or somebody who can take, like,
Yeah.
really big swings there, because you know that the storytelling will be solid no matter what, but if you truly want something different, right, and you wanted this to be like a big, like, "Here's the key to the treasure chest" sort of moment, right, for Star Wars comics moving forward, I think you have to take some big, big hits, and I don't know if you have any real interest in Star Wars or not. I've never heard of something like that, but I think it would be cool, like, no matter what he does, if it's New Republic timeline, if it's Mando timeline, if it's, you know, Starfighter tie-ins or something like that, or just completely its own thing, he'll make something that just his name alone is gonna attract people to.
Yeah, I think Hickman. I feel like somebody asked us this question before a long time ago, and Hickman would be like the ultimate dream writer, especially for the like people Marvel has on staff, because we have to consider that as well. I know critical thinker, you said Snyder and Jeff Johns, and that would be awesome too, but they're never leaving DC, so they're never gonna write Star Wars. Um, I would love those too. So I'm trying to keep my mind focused on Marvel. So while Sonic was talking, I looked up like who's on Marvel's staff that they're currently paying to be pretty much exclusive Marvel writers, or at least exclusive Marvel writers when it comes to the superhero genre. I think the other two names are pretty interesting. This one specifically is Donny Cates. Donny Cates has really taken off over the last 7, 8 years. He's done a lot of Ghost Rider stuff. Did the Cosmic Ghost Rider, which a lot of people really loved. I'm not a huge Marvel person either with like current Marvel. I've read mostly older Marvel, so I don't know if I've read much of his work, maybe his early part of his run, but people really love it. So that's an interesting name you could throw out there. And Al Ewing, which I did actually read Immortal Hulk and really liked it, and that was pretty fun. He's been doing some cosmic stuff recently. I think Al Ewing would be pretty interesting as well. That's mostly out of the people on their main staff writers. Those are the bigger names that I would say would be out there. I mean, Jason Aaron's already written it. Could he come back? I think that would be pretty interesting too to have Aaron come back. It's been what, like going on 9 years since he left the book, 8, 9 years. So he hasn't written Star Wars in a good long while. Um, I could see him coming back as well if they wanted to do that. But I'm not really, like I said, I'm not really caught up currently on what's coming out from Marvel's superhero lines. And I know somebody like Hickman, they're never going to let him walk away from what he's been working on with Marvel currently, especially with them trying to go all in this build up to Doomsday and to Secret Wars, and whether Secret Wars ends up being 2 movies or not too. They could have a trilogy of Avengers movies here in the next 3 years, and they're gonna really wanna pump those comic sales as well, and Star Wars is definitely like the back burner type of thing for Marvel, when it comes to their featured writers. But not sure what Jason Aaron's currently working on, but if he wanted to do, I know he's doing Superman, so he's not exclusively Marvel. He's doing the new Superman. God, why am I blanking on the name of it? Um you'll know what I'm talking about in the comments, but that was pretty decent. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, good question. Let's see. Critical Thinker says, yeah, Hickman's architect work at Ultimate Marvel would make him a good pick. I think Ewing, Cates, or Hickman. Uh, oh, yeah, Philip Kennedy Johnson just signed an exclusive with Marvel. Yeah, he's done fantastic work with DC. I do think the biggest problem with the writer is how much editorial will give a good writer room to do anything particularly interesting. Aaron did great work, but felt hemmed in by editorial. I believe Aaron said in an interview that editorial really restricted what he could do since comics are considered the lowest on the totem pole of Star Wars content. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd imagine, especially with Star Wars not only being lowest on the totem pole comics wise for Lucasfilm, but also definitely less of a priority in general for Marvel as a company, that Star Wars content and comics kind of gets the short end of the stick often. I think they're really trying to appeal to certain audiences, and that's why they keep everything a lot shorter now, because they don't have that long-term readership that they get with some of the mainline Marvel books. But yeah, Philip Kennedy Johnson would be an awesome pick as well. But yeah, thanks for that
Oh,
question. Yeah, you can
I'd
follow.
say one thing, just looking at some names that have been popping up, Jed McKay, he'd be pretty good for his Black Cat work. And then I've been kinda exploring a little bit of the X-Men stuff, and Moreva Ayodele, I don't know if I'm saying that name right, but he's like a Nigerian comic book writer who, like, loves Storm, and he's been getting, like, a lot of, like, hype for it, right? So, I don't know, it could be pretty interesting if they just kinda go for more of those people who are, like, used to working amongst, like, really intricate structure and storytelling and groups in Marvel Comics, as opposed to people who are just the big names, right? People who've kinda, like, done the legwork. That'd be pretty cool to see. Your comment about Aaron, I think he did mention something like that, but honestly, I don't 100% believe him, to be honest, because he had, like, the most, like, classic Star Wars storytelling. Like, there was certain things he might not have been able to say or do, but a lot of his stuff was a little bit more vague, like, plot-wise. Like, it's like, "Okay, this thing is happening, I'm gonna spend some time with Han here. Okay, this thing's happening with Leia, I'm gonna spend time," right? Versus Gillen, he carried over what he did with his line, and he wrote, I would say, the strongest stretch of the entire comics. I think Aaron probably starts off at a higher point, but Gillen just continues to rise, and we should have just ended with, his just scouring a show turn run, and then that would have been it, right? Obviously, we got, I believe it was Packer who showed up for that final run, and I'm just not a fan of that, and I've been a fan of much more of his other work in Star Wars, but that just doesn't feel like a real ending to me in comparison to literally walking up the flight of the Falcon, hand in hand of the big 3, right, of Gillen. So, again, I'm always gonna throw my hat in that Gillen should come back. I think he's if he has those same limitations as Aaron, he's proven to be really good at handling it in comparison. I think Aaron just maybe burnt out too quickly or something.
Yeah, I think that would be a great pick as well. I mean, I'm not sure again what Kieran Gillen's currently doing, but his work on Star Wars has been awesome. And I think I think this is a tricky time period, though. Obviously, like you mentioned earlier, the Mandalorian, Grogu coming out, how much they really want to devote to this time period, how much they want to focus on the main characters, what they want to do with them in the future. This is the hardest time period they've had to focus on. Whereas, they could do whatever they wanted between 4 and 5 and 6, because nobody was going to make a movie or TV show in those time periods. So we shall see what comes in the future. But yeah, thanks for that question. I think we're gonna let's see. Scroll down to Brandon's second question. It said, "Did you know in 2005 George Lucas originally approached and asked Genndy Tartakovsky if he wanted to be Lucasfilm president, but he turned it down?" That's close to what happened. He asked him if he wanted to be president of Lucasfilm Animation, and he turned it down, which is a big that's a big distinction. Not Lucasfilm president, but what the articles that have been going out around recently have been saying is that Dave Filoni ended up taking that position that he offered Genndy. Could Genndy have become Lucasfilm president had he followed the same path that Dave Filoni followed? I think that's what people are speculating. Oh, Genndy, like in another world, Genndy Tartakovsky could have been president of Lucasfilm right now, but in a past life, or if he accepted that position, but he was offered the Dave Filoni position of being the head of animation and running the full feature length 3D animated Clone Wars show.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are forgetting that volume 1 is all microsodes. Those are 2 to 3 minutes that were stitched together and were played before the Friday block. I didn't actually see the Friday block myself, but I've seen, like, people seeing the countdown to the shows and then saying, like, "But first Clone Wars," and it play out like that. And then volume 2 was obviously more classic, like, 15 to 20-minute run episodes. I personally, as someone who's actually engaged in a lot of Genndy Tartakovsky's work since I was a kid, from Dexter's Lab to Samurai Jack and everything, I'm happy it didn't happen. I think he's one of those guys where he's better when he has like that unbridled source of creativity. I think you hamming him into the Star Wars franchise, I think his style just runs up against eventually what George Lucas is looking for. I think what he did for Volume 1 especially is the stuff that's always remembered more anyways, but that works because it's like the initial days. It's like all out, like, let's both sides are like, we can make huge quick blows and finish the war. That's kinda how war works a lot of times, and I think that his style really works there, but as we get past everything on Hyporia, as we get more into, like, Anakin is Knight and all that, he has to settle into that more classic Star Wars progression of storytelling, and it doesn't necessarily, like, reach the highest points of what he's done there, and I'm glad he didn't, continue because, that means that we probably don't get Samurai Jack properly concluded because he's stuck with the Star Wars brand, and that's a huge deal for me. I was a huge fan of Symbiotic Titan, and I think that was a super underrated show from him, and unfortunately, we just didn't get to see that panned out because Cartoon Network's like, "We're not getting any merchandise sales for this series," and I'm like, "Really?" It was probably his best storytelling up to that point. He did the Hotel Transylvania stuff too, and it's like, whatever, like, decent enough. It's pretty popular, makes some money there, but he's back with Adult Swim again, and he's making Primal. I think season 3 is coming out pretty soon, and that's like a rated M animation, and he's someone who has shaped so much and pushed the boundaries of animation, both stylistically and, like, violence-wise with all his previous works, while still having such nuanced storytelling that now with this landscape that we're having way more animation for adults, he was able to do something like Primal that he'd been thinking about for years and years and years. If you're putting him in the Filoni situation, he probably rises up faster, like you're saying, like, as president of Lucasfilm Animation, but I don't know exactly if we really get the 6, 7 seasons, if we get them all back and all that. He's never really striked me from the stuff that I've seen of him as a guy who'd, like, go back and fill in stuff and bring in characters and like, revive them like a George and Filoni tend to do, right? That's more of that classic Star Warsism in them, and I think Filoni was a lot more moldable at that age and that point for only, being, like, supervising director for a couple episodes of season 1 of The Last Airbender versus where Gendy's like, "I've made 2, like, Emmy-winning shows," like, he probably saw himself more eye to eye with George and like, "This is my space you're entering, and I'll work with you." But Filoni is, like, learning directly from George Lucas because he's like, I want to be and learn from this guy and translate what he's looking for in animation." So I think they were coming from very, very different points in their career and their interests and their storytelling methods that I think it would just been a waste if we got past what we got in volume 2 already. I think it would've been cool to get 1 more and maybe have him appear and do some show or something like that, but yeah, I don't think we get Oh Wait, Clone Wars, I don't think we get Rebels, I don't think we get all these Tales of, and now the small Shadow Lord with Gendy in charge.
I've missed a question from Critical Thinker, so we'll go back up and answer that one. Who said, "Had there been more time between Dark Nest and Legacy of the Force in order to have some peacetime and more slowly build up to the Corellian conflict, which books would you like to have seen done in this period? I believe a Young Jedi Knight sequel featuring the same characters but written at an adult level would have been great. Maybe they could have done more with Danny Tahiri on Sonoma Seacott." I love that idea, actually. I think that's great. I'm gonna pick yours, critical thinker. I would love to see that, and then couple that with basically another Young Jedi Knight series centering around Ben. I think those 2 things at the same time could have been a really fun thing to run in between Dark Nest and Legacy of the Force. That would have been really cool. I actually really like your idea, not to steal it, but, I think that's about as good of anything you could have done in that time period. I mean, yeah, you could do more stuff with Luke and Leia and Han, but the true bridge between those series into Legacy of the Force and the things you're really supposed to feel in Legacy of the Force are with those characters, with Jason, with Jaina. I think continuing with what we see in New Jedi Order, especially as well, and then through that with those specific characters, I would have loved to see that. And I think having Ben get his own little series as well, you could have written it for a junior audience. I would prefer the more like they call Young Jedi Knights young adult. It's not really young adult in today's context from with what the reading level is around young adult. It's more of like it's written more for like a 10-year-old audience than it is for like a 15, 16-year-old audience like young adult is considered today. But if you wrote another series in that 10-year-old to 12-year-old reading level with Ben Skywalker, with his friends, I think that would have been a really fun addition as well. So I'd say that.
I like the idea of fleshing it out because I think you and I have gone back and forth about this critical thinker. I'm not a fan of how Legacy of the Force basically undoes all the like really big swings with the Jedi, with the New Republic and everything, right? So yeah, I mean, for me personally, especially since we were just talking about like Star Wars Legacy on this stream with talent and everything, like I would have liked almost something that hints to and connects to Star Wars Legacy with from a little bit more source from this era. Darkness, I think, is 2005 for its release, and Legacy was '06 to 10. I don't know. It to me, it's like it's such a bummer that we don't really see the stakes of New Jedi Order play out. Like, what was the fallout of everything, right? Like the Vong are essentially MIA after New Jedi Order until Legacy, and we have to just kind of assume, like, they're rehabilitated. They are gonna help us out with this Vong forming, and obviously it all goes wrong, but they were such a fascinating species, especially with them being pacified, their whole military being destroyed, but the Zenoma Sakat, traveling away, right? And that being their new home planet. It's like, well, let's see what changes about them. Let's see how their civilization changed. Let's see how the galaxy without their presence deals with them and their influence and how it shapes their thinking, right? Like, yes, there is some of that in like, with the whole Corellian crisis, but that seems more of like an internal fight amongst each other and like the powers that came to be after New Jedi Order. It doesn't really feel like a hey, like this is something that we all allied for. How did this individually shape and affect us, right? That was something I really didn't like. And I mean, like, let's be real, your Vong formed Coruscant, right? And they had it as their like staging ground, their capital for so long. and then by the next book series, everything's good again. It's like you can a couple throwaway lines is not enough for like the galactic capital, to have just been cleaned up and erased by just human work. It's not like they had already figured out the whole like engineering of Vong farming to clean it up, right? That's a thing that Legacy introduces. All right, that's the Ossus project is quite literally about like rehabilitating all these worlds that are still affected, but the story just conveniently side skirts any planet that has been affected by it, and any that has been affected. They're like the power of the galaxy coming together to fix things that are like enough for life to move on. And that I never really liked that. So I would have loved, like you're saying, to have a story set on Xenomasakat about all these Jedi and all these characters, Empire, whoever else, just affected and going there and kind of have like almost like a spiritual retreat series and see how like the interaction back and forth while kept at a distance at a semi-exile actually would have benefited the galaxy or changed people in the galaxy if there are certain things of darkness that they put into the people again, or if there are things on Xenomasakat that we just don't know about that is objectively good for the Vong, but maybe not for the galaxy. Questions like that for sure. Jason is just really weird in Darkness in general. He just kind of says weird things like in normal conversations too, right? Which I it's like, okay, buddy, like we get it. You've been traveling for 5 years, learning from all these forsecs. But Fate of the Jedi is so dependent on, like, uncovering that stuff, and I don't love it past, like, the first 2 books. I think it would've been really interesting if we actually saw at least more of the positive stuff that he learned and, like, how it shaped his visions and all that in a book series dedicated to him, right? I think just to see that transition away from the new Jedi Order hardened warrior to this more weirder esoteric guy who then steps into a military head position during the Corellian crisis with the Galactic Alliance and all that. I feel like there's just too many skips before his fall just happens. If you have a book like series like that, then Legacy of the Forces Darkness I think could be more justified instead of just being like, oh, we're just doing our own version of the prequel storyline and everything that happens there, but just in books, what 45, 50 years on, right? Like you said, contributions to Ben, contributions to the future, contributions to, like, family, like, all that stuff I think would have been huge. Like, there's not a lot between him and Tenel too, frankly. It's just not the best until Legacy of the Force, and even then, it's, like, not they're not together because of everything he's doing. I don't know. I think, yeah, those are the 2 biggest things. If we coulda gotten some Jaina stuff too, sure. I think I'm okay with her being more of a character that's built up through Legacy of the Force and then gets to have that sort of the Jedi trilogy. I think that's where her being alone has the most potent storytelling. Like, she wants to have a family, she wants these connections, but so many of them are dead. She's lost her twin brother, her youngest brother. Chewbacca's been gone for a while now, and her parents are just still fighting the good fight while she's supposed to be the one who's ready to strike out against any enemy of the Jedi, right? Like, what does that do to her and her psyche? That's something I still think has more potent storytelling than necessarily what happens between New Jedi Order and Legacy of the Force. But, a couple of books would have been nice there. Like, again, like this whole time period that you're talking about, we could get like small trilogies. I think this could have been very Bantam-esque where we have a couple of standalone books for these characters to catch them up and transition them, a couple of trilogies for like ideas that can be explored and then set aside and then be picked up in a whole different era, like post Legacy or something like that. Yeah. I agree though in general that like you said, there should have been books between, what happened between New Jedi Order and Darkness and Legacy of the Force, because Darkness is not a very good transition between such an impactful chapter in Star Wars storytelling and then arguably the beginning of the unwinding of Legends with Legacy of the Force.
Let's get to our last couple stories here, and then we'll get back to your guys' questions to round out the stream for the night. So we did have some people asking about Taika Waititi, so I think we should talk about that real quick. Don't have to spend too much time on it. But Taika Waititi was interviewed, and he spoke to Variety while on the red carpet for Fing at Sundance Film Festival this week. And he stated that while his Star Wars script does delve into the comedy, he is also going to be focusing on some serious subjects. So the direct quote is, "The stakes are very high and there are serious things going on. but there's a lot of fun to be had. So I feel like this is almost like directly in opposition to what we talked about last week, right? Where we talked about Kathleen Kennedy's closing comments, her exit interview that she did with all those different stories that were coming out. And one of the things she mentioned in the same breath as the Lando movie as well was that Taika Waititi's script is still alive and they are still working on it. It is, she called it back burner, but she said they are still working on it. One thing we also talked about last week was that she said it was hilarious. And we talked a little bit about, how does Taika's style specifically fit into Star Wars? How is his style, as he kind of is going into Taika 2.0, where he couldn't do anything wrong, basically. His comedy was always hitting for like 10 years straight. And then with Love and Thunder, it kind of went a little over the top for a lot of people, and it fell flat with audiences, and he's kind of pulled back on how much he's been working on, where before he had like a 6, 7, 8 year stretch where he was just in everything. um, Now he's kind of pulled back. He hasn't made a film since 2023. This is his first work since then, and it's exciting to hear that the stakes are very high. I think that's the most interesting thing from the specific quote that I pull out of it. I'm excited to hear that there is going to be some substance to his movie, that it isn't just a straight up comedy. I'm still interested in, what exactly the film was, because originally, going back to 2020 when this was announced, the rumors always were that this was Dawn of the Jedi. His movie was going to be Dawn of the Jedi. And then now we know that it's not Dawn of the Jedi because James Mangold got hired to do Dawn of the Jedi. So what is this movie? What are the stakes? What's going on? And all that remains to be seen. I'm still not 100% convinced this is ever going to happen. Again, having these public comments from filmmakers about their Star Wars stuff that ultimately never happens is not uncommon. We've heard Ryan Johnson talk for 10 years about his trilogy. We've heard um, recently, who's doing Rogue Squadron? I'm blanking on her name.
Patty Jenkins.
Patty Jenkins talking about her script for Rogue Squadron, and we've heard nothing about it since her podcast appearance. So we've seen this happen. So when people are put on the spot, they have to say something. So I don't 100% still fully believe that this means like Taika's movie is now at a level above Lando, a level below Kinberg and Sean Levy's stuff, but a level above Lando and Dawn of the Jedi. Like it's next. I don't believe that personally still, but I at least am a little more excited to hear that there are some like concrete things there, that not only did he turn in a draft, like he has real Star Wars connections, real Star Wars story here, that we should be interested in. And Taika for a long time was one of my favorite filmmakers. I really did enjoy his stuff. I really looked forward to everything he made. So I'm excited to hear that he seems enthused about this project, because for a while it almost just kind of seemed like he's involved in the Disney system. He did two Marvel movies. He was in Mandalorian season 2. He or directed an episode of Mandalorian season 1. Was IG-11. He's just gonna be like the next guy funneled into the system. It kind of felt like that for a while, and I wasn't quite sure, how much of the passion that are in a lot of his other films, including something like Thor Ragnarok, would be there. But it does sound like he's got a pretty good feel for whatever this is. And if it happens one day, I hope for the best with it. The second story I wanted to bring up, and these are the last things, is it also piggybacks about Kathleen Kennedy's exit interview last week. So one of the things we talked about last week as well was that she never once mentions Charmin Obaid-Chinoy's New Jedi Order movie, nor does she mention Rey at all in her exit interview. Well, Daisy Ridley was also asked about this, and she says that she thinks the departure of Kathleen Kennedy will not affect what she's working on. The direct quote is, "It won't affect me going forward. I think what's lovely is people are excited because they want to see my film, which is great. It's really wonderful to be part of something where people don't know as much. And I love that people want to know, but it will also be a great surprise when the thing is done. So that also sounds like they're moving forward. I mean, Daisy Ridley's been giving those types of responses for well over a year now when it comes to Ray projects. I am fully convinced she's involved in the future of Star Wars. I'm still not 100% convinced, though, that New Jedi Order, specifically, which again, she doesn't directly mention in her quote, she mostly is talking about just Ray as a character. I'm not 100% convinced that New Jedi Order exists, or at least exists in the way it was originally outlined to be prior to the Starfighter and Simon Kinberg additions to the post Rise of Skywalker world. But Sonic, you hear those two stories. One, do you think New Jedi Order or Taika Waititi's movies are going to happen? And two, are you a little more optimistic hearing both people talk about their respective Star Wars projects?
I'll start with the Taika one. I don't think that's happening. I mean, it's a thing that she could mention in her exit interview, but she also, like you said, didn't mention anything about Patty Jenkins. She didn't mention anything about Charmine's project. We know officially that Carlton Cuse and his son Nick were hired to do like a secret Star Wars show that might still be coming out. And Carlton Cuse is one of the lead writers for Lost back in the day. No mention of that either, right? So it's like as much as it was, I told about on stream when Kathleen stepped down and that exit interview was really insightful. Still a business. There's only so much you can reveal about everything you are doing or involved with, right? So I think there's more of like lip service towards what we've seen in Taika's case, and maybe even in Mangold's case for Dawn of the Jedi, right? And that whole Dawn of the Jedi thing being kind of jumped from Taika to Mangold, it could be true. I mean, that first logo of sorts that they released was like very Flintstones, so like ancient kind of looking big. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, anyways, I think Taika just needs even that last movie that he did in 2023. Technically, that's not his last movie. His last movie is Thor: Love and Thunder. That movie that came out, that Last Goal Wins, was filmed in 2020. All right, it just got delayed for so long, and maybe they just didn't think it was all that good, and they finally were like, okay, let's just release it. So that's not a lot of confidence either, right? They probably were like, "Oh, man, like, after Thor: Love and Thunder, like, being a hit, like, we'll be able to drop this one, more locally in New Zealand and a lot more of, like, Southeast Asia and then build out from there." And then Love and Thunder obviously got, like, really bad reception, and it's like, "Oh, no, like, this guy seemingly has had issues at least since the end of Ragnarok." Right? And I mean, there's a lot of rumors with him and his girlfriend Rita Ora, Tessa Thompson, and all that. Just that he kind of got more into the celebrity lifestyle as opposed to like being focused on directing. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But he, I think it's good that he takes a step back. I think the max that he's done recently is like some stuff for What We Do in the Shadows, and even that's like a couple years old by now. So and he came to that show after not initially being on board with it, right? Because he's like, "I only want the movie, let you guys do whatever you want," and then he's fell in love with the show, and he's like, "Okay, I'll add characters, I'll add storylines and work through that as well," but yeah, he needs a reset. He needs a very good, clean reset. Star Wars is not a reset for anybody. Star Wars is like you've reached the mountaintop, you're ready to make that big swing in your career, and he's arguably already done that with Marvel, with Ragnarok, so I don't see that being the place for him right now, and, it's a bit of a shame too because no matter what happens with him as a director, I think fundamentally we're go whatever Taika we see next, and if it is a successful film from him, it's not gonna be the Taika that we first fell in love with or like, "Wow, like, that's the next big guy," right? Like, something about him will change, and even though he's saying, like, "Yes, there's gonna be some serious moments and stuff like that, but still a focus on drama," that stuff does not ring well with people. If anything, if he was really progressing well with his story and all that and everything with Lucasfilm, he probably would be leaning more on, like, the stuff that people have considered weaknesses for him, and then said, like, "Yeah, I'm sprinkling my humor, I'm trying a couple of different things," right? He probably wins a lot more sympathy and more like, hopefulness for what moves forward. What he's saying here just kind of seems like the same stuff as always, right? Like, oh, I'll make focus on the serious moments as needed. Which is like, okay, great, buddy, but that's kind of the issue, right? We don't really have proof of that in the last half decade really from you. So yeah, it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens from that. Uh, as far as, Daisy Ridley being optimistic and all, I think that extra layer to that, like you said, there's Kinberg in that trilogy. There's whatever's happening with Starfighter, and now that's wrapped up. And we've been hearing like more and more things about like, set design, just like we are about Ahsoka and all that. So, maybe ask that question again in a couple of months. And maybe we'll see if there's some like connective tissue being made for the era as a whole. But as far as those 2 projects, interfering or reshaping New Jedi Order, I think we're also just forgetting Hunt for Ben Solo. Like, that thing completely changed probably how we look at the post-sequel era. If you're saying, we're gonna have an Academy Award nominated actor in Adam Driver, whose career has only gotten bigger after Star Wars, coming back with the talent of Soderbergh and having it be greenlit before, anything else would even probably Starfighter was at that point, or, concurrently with Starfighter, and then that kind of flows out at the window. This timeline for the new Jedi Order film itself is probably all skewed. Like, oh, okay, we have to push Rey's back a little bit, let this be mostly on Ben, but then maybe have her cameo or have her show up in third act. Things of these nature, right? And now that it's been canceled and you've seen the uproar online, I'm sure there's again more internal feedback like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And it's in a real flux point. That's the real big thing for me. It's those 3 projects, especially Hunt for Ben Solo now, that's really making people go like, "Oh, okay, how are we gonna handle Rey?" So I think they are working with her constantly. I think she is seeing scripts for multiple projects that she's gonna feature in, but for the lead project of New Jedi Order, I think they're really integrating it into the Kinberg trilogy or making a trilogy out of her story and The Hunt for Ben Solo kinda combined together. Something like that, right? Like, it's gonna be some sort of additional piece between whatever happens if we get a 10, 11, 12. What yeah, it's a weird one that she's so optimistic for it, but I think she's not j like Ewan McGregor where he's like, "Oh, I don't know. No, I'm never gonna come back. I'd love to," and all that, like, I don't think she's lying. She's very, like, purposeful, saying like, "Yeah, we're working on stuff. We'll get to that point. It's just right now we're not there." So I think that's fair for her to still show that excitement, and I think it just speaks to, like, that she has more than just belief, right? Or more than just hope. She's probably seeing active things, and they're just being very, very careful about how they're gonna make her return worthwhile and fit in with everything post Starfighter, which, I'm fine with that. It probably is terrible for the media cycle and for clickbait videos and stuff like that, but if it results in a better final product, I think all of that stuff will be forgotten very quickly.
Yeah, when it comes to Taika, like I think his his spirit and his joy that he brought to something like a Thor Ragnarok. And we use Thor Ragnarok as an example purely because it's his biggest budget success versus his other lower key comedies. My favorite movie is What We Do in the Shadows. I absolutely love that movie. And Hunt for the Wilder People is probably my second favorite movie of his. I've seen all his stuff, and I think he has the potential to really hit a Star Wars movie out of the ballpark. Like when they announced his name, I was pretty excited about it because it was pre Love and Thunder, but it really has just been sometimes you can get famous so fast or like blow up so fast and even like people like me who knew about you when you were in the circuit and really enjoyed your work in the indie circuit, right? He blows up with Ragnarok and then now it's like studio whether maybe it's him, maybe it's studios, but people are like, everybody, we want more of that. We want more. We want you to do more. And it just seemed like he got to the point where it was just like he was everywhere. He was in things as an actor, he was in things as a director, he was stretching himself maybe too thin. I don't know that. Obviously, I don't know him. I don't know what he's thinking about, but it seemed to get to that point. Papa says down here, Papa 66 says he's from New Zealand. Do people in New Zealand like his work? Are you guys a little out on him? Like, I'm not sure. Next Goal Wins didn't really connect to me at all, but I know it was honestly it was made more for that type of audience, right? People in the Pacific Islands. So did you guys like that movie? I'm not sure, but Papa says, glad to hear that. Makes me feel better about his movie. But I think Star Wars has to hit their next few projects out of the park to win some fans back. Don't think timing's right for Taika. Yeah, I think in general, Star Wars, no matter what they put out, needs to have some hits. Otherwise, they're not gonna. Nothing's gonna really work. They're in this weird period of lacking the draw that was the George Lucas Star Wars. They're lacking the characters from that, right? So they're going to have to make great movies to attract people back in order to make up for the fact that they don't have a Luke Skywalker to put on the poster to get people into the theater. But yeah, I don't know. I think at his best he can make an awesome Star Wars movie. At If he's not all in though, and that's where sometimes like when a movie takes 6 years to make, 7 years to just get the script, sometimes it just doesn't feel like you're all in like you really it's sometimes it can be like it's too good of an opportunity to pass up, but maybe your heart's not completely in it as a writer. And sometimes you have to be all in, especially if somebody who like him, most of his best work has been in that kind of indie scene, really kind of embracing his roots and the comedy that comes from his roots. Does it lose a little bit of that magic when you're not all the way in on something? I'm not sure, and again, don't know how he feels about it, but it has been it's going on 6 years since they officially announced it, and it was announced basically through the trades before that. So we shall see on that one. Ray, again, I think she's in the movies. I think she'll maybe make a cameo in Starfighter, definitely be in Simon Kinberg's movies. I'm just still not convinced she's getting the new Jedi Order movie that they pitched in 2023. I think it's going to be a completely different movie, even if we do get a Rey movie. It's going to be something entirely different than the original 15 years after Rise of Skywalker movie they pitched. So we shall see on that one. We're going to wrap up our stream here pretty soon. So again, send in your last couple questions. Super Chat guarantees you on the show tonight. We're still going to be running down through the same rules. It's about 2 questions per person, and then cycling back to the top. But if we don't get to your question and you are at the bottom, you want to get something in real quick, send in a super chat, helps the channel out. You get on the show. You can check out our Patreon, YouTube membership programs as well to see if there's a tier that's right for you. Certain tiers do have priority chat access. Going back to Papa at the bottom says New Zealanders love his older stuff, but he's moving different these days. Fame got to him. Yeah, well, his older stuff too, right? Really connected. It was very New Zealand based. It was that sense of humor, right? It was steeped in. I mean, one, he was making all these films in New Zealand, right? So there was that, but it just seemed like it was steeped in New Zealand comedy, and his newer stuff obviously is more Hollywood. So yeah, thanks for that perspective. It's interesting hearing about it from somebody who lives there. But going back up to the top here, I think the next question. So I think we'll get to one more of yours, Brandon, and then we're gonna skip forward because Brandon's first question was associated with Maul. So Brandon said, non-Star Wars question: do you think James Gunn bringing in previous writer Christina Hodson, who did Birds of Prey, The Flash, Bumblebee, and Batgirl for Batman: Brave and the Bold, is a good idea or bad idea for DC? Well, again, the more objective perspective from me is that I don't know what her pitch was and I don't know what the story is. So she might be the perfect person for it. Obviously, the track record isn't great, especially when it comes to DC projects. Bumblebee is my favorite thing of those movies you mentioned. Really, out of you pretty much mentioned everything she's worked on. So overall track record doesn't make me excited. It's not like a choice where all of a sudden I get like, yes, this movie's going to be awesome. But I think tonally, where Birds of Prey is, where Flash can sometimes be, I am hoping they go a little bit more into that fantastical tone for this type of Batman. Like I've been wanting to see, especially because we have the Batman coming out at the same time, which is our dark Batman. I don't want it to be a comedy, and that's what concerns me a little bit is that like I don't want to go too much into comedy with Batman, but I do want it to actually have some fun. I want it to have the Bat family. I want it to have that spirit that was there in the 70s, in the 80s comics, in, if you're calling it Brave and the Bold, in Brave and the Bold from the 50s. Like, I want it to have that spirit. Obviously, we need to take Batman seriously enough to have him be one of the main characters of the DCU, but there has to be a little bit of fantasy there in order for him to believably go up against a dark side or another threat that's a Mongol, somebody who's a galaxy wide threat, top tier DC threat. It's hard to believe like a Christian Bale Batman could actually go up against somebody like that, or a Robert Pattinson Batman, right? They just don't have that element of fantasy to them. So you need a little bit of fantastical, and you need a little bit of lightheartedness for the odd couple dynamic they are going to do with the, if it's still the original pitch of having Damian and Bruce as Batman and Robin, if they're going still with Damian as as Robin, you do need that kind of odd couple dynamic, that frustration that grows there because they are exactly the same. But also mixing it with a Tim if he's in it, with a Dick Grayson. There's a lot of fun to be had there. So there's some spirit in some of the other things Christina has worked on that I think she could bring to a script like that. But the things that really do scare me are the Flash. I don't think the script for Flash is horrible. But it's not, it doesn't stand out. It's not great, and the movie itself turned out really poor. So obviously that's a strike against. And then Batgirl, we've only heard negative things since they've, canned it. So we won't know obviously ever for Batgirl, but those things don't mark a lot of confidence. And then Birds of Prey got decent critical reviews. I personally didn't love it, but I thought Harley Quinn was written pretty well for it. If you're somebody who likes the modern version of Harley Quinn. For me, growing up with the Batman animated series with that version of Harley Quinn, the little bit more sinister, sadistic, violent villain version of Harley Quinn, I didn't really like that movie. But if you're somebody who enjoys the current run of Harley Quinn, where she's a little bit more anti-hero, a little bit more referential, then I think she wrote that movie in kind of for that right audience. But I don't know. I'm nonplussed on it. I don't have a feeling either way yet, but it's certainly not a choice that made me go, "Oh yes, that's the perfect tone for this specific project."
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about her, but I thought Bumblebee was pretty decent from the half of the movie I saw, and I think it had that weird time period of where it felt like it was gonna be like a semi reboot of the series, but then it's also a continuation. But Rise of the Beasts and stuff like that, that's kind of come out of it now. They're trying to do a spin-off with them and G.I. Joe, which I guess has happened in comics, but I'm just like, all right, we're losing the plot here. It's just Hasbro toys that are making big movies again, like the Masters of the Universe movie that's coming out pretty soon. Which that one I think actually looks pretty decent, but nonetheless, yeah, that's really the only project I've seen of hers, and I haven't seen anything else. That being said, I think it's more of the fact that she's been working on a lot of these DCU projects as like not the lead writers per se, but she's writing credits on, I believe, on Peacemaker. I'm not sure if she has it on the animated show. I'm blanking on the name. Um,
Oh,
uh,
Creature Commandos.
Creature Commandos, but she has some, you know, um, writing continuity with James Gunn throughout the DCU, and I think that's probably the biggest reason why she got this chance, right? Obviously, it's Batman, and I think James Gunn has been saying very positive things about, like, how he wants to handle it, and if he is still true to his word, he won't approve a script until they feel like it's right and ready. So, she's the lead writer for now, right? But let's say in, like, 6 months or a year from now, like, first of all, he's also saying, like, we have to wait till Batman 2 is done before we really make a decision on introducing the DCU Batman, so I think there's just time to be bought with Batman in the DCU, but I think this is just a plenty of time to see based on our scripts, based on the execution, based on the development, for him to judge, like, is this ready? Is this what I think is gonna be right for this character and to be different from the Batman to be different from DCEU and what we saw from the big super buff Dark Knight Returns-esque Batman of Affleck, right? Is this gonna have its chance to stand on its own 2 legs, right? And if it does feel like that, and, we're seeing the DCU continue with Lanterns being a success, with eventually getting something from Wonder Woman and stuff like that leading into this, then, yeah, I think the script will be put into full production because he feels confident about it, and all these other projects who he doesn't have a direct, like, full hold on have also turned out to be great and added to the flavor of the DCU without being just a James Gunn universe. Then I think he'll be like, "Yeah, I feel confident about this now." But I think that I think the choice right now is just we have 3, we have 3 projects in play, and they're all mine for the most part. We have to also be cognizant about what comes next from these other voices. If this, crossover between HBO, which, now is also under Netflix, right? If it blends in really well with the movie side of the franchise, or we're gonna have the same issues as like Marvel with their TV shows, right? So I think this is just something that's approved for now, and hopefully, things will work out, and she's continues to grow as a writer, and maybe she has, and he's seen that. But I think it's also going to be a little bit dependent on the success of other voices and other projects, like the Mister Miracle project and everything else, before it really gets to the point of like actually dealing with going into production on a Batman movie again.
Yeah, I mean, I think all that's true, but Batman is just such a core piece of this that you can't really move forward without Batman. So whether it's like introducing, I mean, they could go the route of like, how they wanted to do it with the DC EU of like introducing other characters in a Justice League movie or a team up movie before they got solo movies. You could do that with Batman, right? Because everybody knows Batman. You can do that better with your main characters rather than Aquaman or Flash or people that they the audiences don't know as well. But yeah, I mean, I think the connection with James Gunn to this writer is the most positive thing. And obviously, James Gunn has reiterated over and over and over again that it's all about the script and like they're not going to green light anything that has a bad script. So if she turns in a bad script, hopefully they don't green light it, right? But maybe he loves her pitch and maybe she is going to turn in a great script. We don't know. But yeah, I have a little bit more confidence because of the seemingly very strict oversight in turn at the scripting phase of pre-production rather than other studios where we see them go like we don't even need a script. Let's just get everything into production and we'll figure it out later. Sometimes both can work, but I tend to prefer the James Gunn route of really honing in on scripts first. We have a lot of comments about this specific question. Critical Thinker said, I think for somebody as important as Batman, they should have picked somebody with more proven track record. I really wouldn't want them to avoid the gritty crime drama aspects of Batman just because of the Reeves verse. Batman, the animated series, and Arkham had both gritty and fantastical because that's needed for Batman. In the comics, Batman usually has a grounded crime drama element. It's not just something Nolan and Reeves invented because Batman also fights a crocodile man. Well, I mean, obviously, I know that very, very well, but I think what my comment was about Robert Pattinson and Christian Bale is that the way those 2 Batmans are portrayed, the fact that it is so physical, the fact that it is so, um, grounded, that's the stuff they have to kind of alleviate in this project. Batman has to have the ability to take down a giant crocodile, and that's something I don't buy from Christian Bale's Batman. As much as I love Christian Bale's Batman, I don't buy that he can beat a giant crocodile because he can't beat a non-venomed Bane. Like so, like I just want to see those elements. I want to see a Batman who seemingly moves faster than a normal person should be able to move. I want to see a Batman who can take on a crowd of 30 guys at the same time like he can in the Arkham games. I want to see somebody who's swinging with his grapple shot across the city and then flipping and turning his cape into a hang glider and then jumping onto the roof. Like I want to see him do things that a Nolan Batman wouldn't do because it's too unrealistic. That's what I mean by the fantastical. And I think when you bring in the comics, you have and bring in a Batman who can live in the same universe as a Superman and still go toe to toe with him. He has to be able to do some of that stuff. And you do see that a little bit in the Affleck Batman. You just didn't get to see enough of it really to like fully believe it. Um, but his is the closest to like that, just that speed and that dynamism and the gadgets and all that stuff that you would need for Batman to exist in a world with these otherworldly villains. Critical Thinker also says, or no, Brandon also says James Gunn did bring the cinematographer for Flash in before he made his Superman movie. And then Critical Thinker says, I feel like the DCU needs more big voices than James Gunn. James Gunn's style doesn't really mesh as well with mainstream superhero stuff as well as it does on the fringes with Peacemaker or Guardians of the Galaxy. Gunn has mentioned wanting multiple styles and tones, and I'm really hoping he follows through on that because most projects so far still feel very James Gunn. Superman is the only one that wasn't like that, and even Superman's weakest points are the points where the Gunnisms shine through. I think Pattinson feels very much like early year one Batman, long Halloween Batman. By comparison to Bale, I could see him leveling up as the films go on. And he could for sure. I mean, he does take down big groups of people. We do see him gliding through the city. He just doesn't have that pure kind of otherworldliness that like a comic Batman has. I know you kind of understand what I mean by without me fully explaining it if you're a comic reader. But I and yeah, I all we've seen so far is the James Gunn style. This will be the year that changes because we are getting Supergirl, which even though he's a producer on it, technically not a writer and not the director. And then we are getting, but it still does seem very James Gunn by the trailers. And then we're getting lanterns, which I think will be the thing that is the most different from his specific style. So I would say after those two things, but specifically lanterns, I would expect to see a little bit more variation in the DCU style.
Yeah, not much I can add there other than this is the real testing year for the DCU. Everything so far has just been like quasi Superman, super family storytelling, and you can get away with it feeling similar-ish, and then Peacemaker being quasi Deadpool in the sense of like we don't really care about what he adds to the greater canon. It's just more to the how does he feel as a character? How does he feel as good he did in season one? Which for a lot of people he did, but for others he didn't because it just didn't really feel structured right in season two. So yeah, this will be the first real test. I think lanterns they're just being so tight about that, but if they nail that, then I think the door's open for everything.
Kevin Davis 8646 says Dave Filoni going forward with Kathleen Kennedy projects, even if some of them go straight to Disney Plus. Disney taking wrong lessons from Star Wars fans, criticizing anything. They're playing it safe by not trying to offend anybody with their new storytelling. Well, firstly, I mean, pretty much anything you see from like the Dave Filoni reign won't really be out until like 2028, 2029. So yeah, they're gonna go with whatever Kathleen Kennedy already had, because if you just canceled everything Kathleen Kennedy, then you wouldn't have any more Star Wars projects at all until, 2029, 2030, because it takes that long to make them. But I think I understand what you're saying, and Disney has generally kind of played it safe in the last few years because they can't seem to find that kind of balance between their storytelling and what their audience is wanting. Um, but I'm hoping that by bringing in these new voices into Star Wars, especially in the directors and writers chairs, we can get a little bit more variation to the point where it doesn't feel like everything's being played safe. It feels like they're actually taking some risks with some different styles. So we'll see. I mean, we haven't really seen stylistically different Star Wars in the theaters since that run of the five movies with between 2015 and 2019. But even when we got Rise of Skywalker, it started to feel very similar. Solo felt very homage to a lot of original trilogy stuff. Rogue One stylistically different, so we will see some of that stuff. TV's taking a little bit more risk, but yeah, hopefully they don't stick to one particular thing.
don't know what to really add to that. We'll see, right? Like this is we're at that point of the stream, guys, where it's like it's just pure speculation. We can only base it off of our like knowledge of film and education, and obviously Liam has that background and having read all these comic runs, and I don't, right? So I can't really add more to it, but you know, you just have to wait and see sometimes. I think there's just if I can add anything to it, it's just this anticipation culture kind of starts to kill off, like, just letting, something be what it is, because 'cause we're always trying to find a reference, we're always trying to see some inspiration, trying to examine someone's whole film history and all that, but once you start doing that, you're, like, shutting down, like, new creators with their voices and what they could add, like, if I think people forget, like, an example of, like, Harley Quinn. She's not a comic character. She was introduced by Bruce Timm in the animated series, and then she's had many, many revolutions to her character since, and she has become an old-time DC character and an entry point for so many people, but a lot of the voices that first dabbled with her as a character and her relationship with Joker and then on her own and with Poison Ivy and all that aren't, like, the most established writers ever, so I'm gonna let like Liam handle a lot more of these DC questions and all these kind of stories about what moving forward in the future of like the DCU and all that. But I think sometimes when we ask these questions, we're not, you know, being open to the possibility the DCU is just gonna be its own thing ultimately. It's not an adaptation. It's inspired by all these works. And hopefully a good inspiration leads to new ideas that are stem from it, right? I think if you watch DCU just and MCU just to see the storylines that you love from your favorite runs and your favorite authors, then someone's going to inevitably be disappointed and someone's going to be like elated by something or find issues about like, oh, I didn't like this being adapted. I'm already seeing that with Woman of Tomorrow. They're like, why'd you change how this ginger looking guy looks? It's like, well, this is supposed to be in space. Maybe James Gunn felt like that wouldn't really sell well, that have like a very ginger looking bounty hunter, right? Like already people are criticizing that without seeing more of the film. The only shot that we got on Lobo has been very like dusty and very poorly backlit, and everybody's like, "Lobo looks terrible now, like, he needs the red eyes like in the '90s TV shows and stuff." It's like, "Well, we don't know yet, guys, like, let us see more, and get into it, and then, make more concrete comments when we actually have people who've watched it, or at least have given some reviews out." But, yeah, at this point in the stream, I there's not much more I can add to the ideas and that people are throwing out there. I think I can only add to, like, maybe let's, you know, be a little bit open to the idea that sometimes doubling and tripling down on your thought process about something isn't necessarily gonna be indicative of the final product.
All right, I think these are going to be the last two I read. So again, if you want something on the stream tonight, send in a super chat. But yes, HD Game Tube, I will get to your first question you put up earlier, just so we, because I know you asked that one quite early into the stream. So Ryan Smith said, I think Taika's movie could take inspiration from Flash Gordon's elements of the original Star Wars film. I think it could be really fun and pulpy. And yeah, I think it could be too. It just kind of depends on what the story is, right? Like we don't know what it is. It could be a movie that just feels like a basic Star Wars kind of ripoff, or it could actually have its own ambitions. So we will see on that one. But HD GameTube says, how do you guys get invested in big legend stories knowing the canon is completely different? For example, I can't get into the Thrawn trilogy when I know everything that happened is different from Star Wars canon. It's a great question. And it's something, I guess we probably both went through this kind and a lot of Star Wars fans who were reading Star Wars prior to the 2014 split went through at the time is like, okay, now that I know this doesn't count towards the rest of the projects, how do I reinvest myself into things I want to reread, or how do I invest myself into things that I haven't read yet that I would like to still read in Legends? And it is a great question. And for a while, I kind of dropped Legends at the beginning when canon had just started because it just didn't. I was so excited for the movies, right? That like I just wanted anything that could possibly connect to what they were doing with 7, 8, and 9. Um, but I had kind of dropped some of the things I hadn't read yet in order to really delve fully into the canon. And also, it kind of was the exact right or exact reason why they did it, right? Was to just give you a fresh point to where you just wanted to consume everything. Like, I was buying every single issue of the comics as they were coming out. And I did that up until like 2019. Every single one. And then eventually I was like, I'm just spending too much money on this stuff. There's too many coming out, so I can't do that anymore. Um, but I was doing that. I was reading every book as they're coming out, and we still read every book as they're coming out. But I think ultimately where I've gone back to Legends a lot more since about 2017, 2018. The main reason I can still get invested in legend stories that I either am reading for the first time or rereading for the first time in a decade or rereading my favorite legend story is just because fully just think of them as two completely different timelines. And that's to me the way I look at it. To me, even though I enjoy The Force Awakens, even though I really love Rogue One, even though I enjoy parts of Last Jedi and Solo, and I've enjoyed a ton of other shows and stuff they've made, Rebels, Andor, all that stuff. There is the core of Star Wars because I saw it as a kid will still always be 1 through 6. It's just like no matter how many new Star Wars things I add, it's never going to be at the DNA of my Star Wars fandom like 1 through 6 will be. I can add Andor into my, top 5, but I can't it won't really be at that core DNA of my nostalgia for Star Wars. It just won't because that's the age I saw it in my 20s rather than seeing it when I was 7, right? So it's just kind of that like it's the way I experience Star Wars. And not the same for everybody. I'm not saying my way is right and your way is wrong. That's just the way I experience it. So because of that, I'm able to still invest myself into Legends continuity because those 6 movies are still part of that. So like a lot of the stuff building in Legends is interesting because it's an alternate take on stuff that they've changed in canon for those 6 movies legacy and the story around there, right? Not to mention I was a Legends reader before the split, so like I still have a basis in like that nostalgia, having read it, for AR points and stuff growing up, having read it in my free time, all that type of stuff. Um, so this is kind of a long-winded answer to just say I keep them as 2 completely different continuities, and because I complete them keep them as 2 different continuities, when I read things that are similar but a little different between both continuities, it's almost more of like an interesting history or a historical take on like this is what Star Wars was and this is how they've changed it, or this was the original idea and they've evolved it over time. Like I find it really fascinating reading Bantam era books, reading the Marvel 70s and 80s comics, reading Brian Daley's work in the early 80s because you see the franchise evolve, the history, and because I'm such a huge fan of just the history of Star Wars and all that stuff, as you can see by most of the videos I've made on this channel, by myself, it's just like it's something I'm fascinated by. So that's how I'm kind of able to still really appreciate Legends stuff that isn't as familiar to me because I find it interesting to track the history of the franchise, to track the history of that timeline and compare it to what we are getting now. And for the most part, I'm all caught up on canon to the point where like it doesn't feel as much like the two clash anymore because canon is is just a like that's what we're living currently, and Legends is what I used to live in the past. I don't. It's hard to explain, but I truly do just enjoy Legends as a piece of history as well. Like I think most of what you've seen, especially in literature and canon, will have roots in some of the stuff they did originally in Legends. I think that's how you can also look at it.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars is America's modern myth and mythology, as you can see with like Tolkien and all that, is that it's not 100%, linked up cleanly, perfect storytelling. I mean, that's a big thing, like, the Middle Earth fans are having issues with, like, what we're seeing from Rings of Power, and I like the show decently enough. I think there's just writing issues in general and, like, some production issues with streaming that definitely affect it, and it probably needs closer to 10 episodes than 8 for to really be able to tell its story, but yeah, I mean, there are things that I'm like, "Oh, it's really interesting seeing, like, Tolkien historians be like, 'This is definitely sourced from this,' and, like, an interpretation that's been, like, changed over the last 20 years of his life versus something that happened right after he was finished working on the Silmarillion and stuff like that," right? Like, it's very interesting to see, like, especially in modern fandom, people who are, like, looking at stuff that was written as a mythology be a little frustrated that, like, "Oh, like, we're not getting exactly how it was," because if we were to truly adapt, like, the Second Age in Middle-earth, you'd have to tell a story that's spread over 5,000 years where humans that you first meet in episode 1 are dead by the next and stuff like that, right? So, it's pretty interesting seeing stuff like that, but Star Wars has never really had, like, adaptation kinda come into play until Legends, right? And it's different than all these other, uh, you know, fandoms and franchises where they've got a comic book or a book series that they're inspired by or using in source for. The EU is like, even though it was never truly officially, like, George Lucas being like, "I give tacit approval to every single project, like, I love this, I'm gonna continue writing that idea into my stories and all that." He was like, "This is a universe that is built off of and inspired by the original trilogy. Have fun with it, I might poke my hand here and there, change a few things, wanna have a little bit more focus on the stuff like this, but for the most part, it is also like an alternative story to even what George imagined it to be, right? He was
Mhm.
just I'm very he was like someone who was like open to like frankly the merchandising possibilities of it. But two, just like, yeah, let's see what other people inspired by the story can draw from like the inspirations that I had, draw directly from Star Wars, what new inspirations can be folded in and remixed with the Star Wars, label and all that, right? So it definitely very interesting. Definitely very interesting, right? And Legends obviously being like 20, 30 years, people are like, "That's definitive stars," even though by the end of Legends, I'm sure a critical thinker can bring this up too. You look at, like, the 2005, 2003, 2005 Clone Wars multimedia project compared to 2008 Clone Wars, everything about, like, Republic Commando is pretty contradictory, but to that show, there's so many things in the comics of the Republic comics that don't really line up with Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars to some degree, and definitely not '08 Clone Wars, right? How did that sit with people? Not great there either, to be fair, and that was when EU was still a thing, and that's when people first really started understanding, like, when we say there's tiers to canon, amongst movies, TV shows, books, and comics that can be constantly overwritten the closer and closer we get to the original source material. That's probably, like, the first time that people are like, "Oh, this isn't like a Star Wars that George is gonna just give full, like, approval for, and let's say everything is on the same level." That's what Disney claimed to do with the reset, like, everything will be on the same level. It's just kinda hard to line everything up like that, right? So, yeah, it's an alternative mythology. It's something that's being sourced into canon all the time and inspiring things that are completely fresh in canon too. But it's also an entire mythology that has everything almost textual instead of cinematic. So it's so much easier for like once you get into the book series, you'll be like, oh my God, I want to know more and more. Like what happens in 20, 30 years with Luke and Han and Leia. And that's really the big appeal of like New Jedi Order. You're really pushing that new generation forward, but you're still like developing the galaxy, the stakes, and everything from the original trilogy. And if you're not liking Heir to the Empire, I think both of us can say that's it's kind of sad because it's like the one that feels closest to, especially in early Bantam era, to the original trilogy. I would say personally, maybe stick through it, even if it feels like, oh, Mara can't show up again. That's not entirely true, right? Like, I mean, there's a whole 30-year gap that Luke can be with Mara, and then things go wrong just shortly before, right? And then we just have plenty of stuff with Luke's Academy that would still be explored and all that. We don't really know anything about Luke as a Jedi Master other than some interactions with Grogu, right? Mara could very easily fit into that. Liam literally has a video about it on our channel, and we've always talked about it like that. But yeah, I mean, if maybe you're not loving Bantam, you can look at Bantam as like, Heir to the Empire is great, Hand of Thrawn is great, everything in between you can kind of pick and choose, and you'll get most of it summarized in Hand of Thrawn as needed. I'm sure if you read Dark Empire, you'll be like, how does this line up with Heir to the Empire? And it really doesn't, to be honest. They're two storytelling. methods. One much more militaristic with Zahn, one much more fantastical with Veitch, that were supposed to line up together, and they both disagreed with which one would come first, right? Like there were arguments way back then. And, Bantam era was also when the mythology was like just mythology, just stories and ideas sourced from it. Once we got to Del Rey with New Jedi Order, that's when the real organization started coming into play. And I'd say that's the longest stretch of books that are just pure Star Wars from new creatives. Once that finishes up, right? Then you have Darkness, then you have Legacy of the Force, but that's when the prequel era kicks in. That's when George's vision is now back on top again, and it just shapes and affects and retcons things that you're like, "Oh, okay, like, that's not really anything that I thought about while I was growing up reading New Jedi Order and stuff." It's a tough thing to really, like, get your head around, right? There's just been so many complications and changes from publishing standards, from how people approach Star Wars, to how Star Wars is different than other franchises and not really adapting stuff, but just creating whole new things. And I can understand that struggle in 2026, right? Being like, why am I reading a book from 93 that I know doesn't go anywhere? But at least Heir to the Empire, I'd say read it for Thrawn because we are going to see Thrawn pay off in Mandoverse, either in a movie or the conclusion series if the Mandalorian Grogu fails, right? Like stuff like that. I think you should at least be open to that. Past that, like, make your decision. If maybe you just want to stick with canon and maybe you want a long running series, High Republic is there for you if you're looking for something close to New Jedi Order into its scope and depth, right? So yeah, give it a shot how you can. And like you said, you only got invested since Force Awakens. Yeah. I mean, for you, you're coming from a totally different starting point. Just like Liam said, like that's what feels right to you. That's what feels like you want more of. And
Mhm.
it's truly the first era of Star Wars that has not had a mass amount of games and comics and books because of everything with streaming taking over and like just online polarization and all. So this is your chance to just explore Legends, jump around Bantam, do what you want. But if you don't even like Heir to the Empire and this trilogy, and you're like, I don't want to continue Bantam, maybe just finish up Hand of Thrawn if you really feel like it. Or you could even skip straight into New Jedi Order. That was genuinely a starting place for a lot of Star Wars fans too. And those books do a decent enough job of like getting you caught up to those previous histories and yeah, legacies of those characters before the whole Yuzon Vong invasion and everything goes wrong, right? So treat it as like mythology, and because it's mythology, you can choose and pick how you want to play with it. If it doesn't feel right this way, try a different way. So keep at it, and if you don't want to, you always got the movies, you've always got the TV shows.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're like Critical Thinker mentions comics. There's Elseworlds, or just any fan of like a text to film, right? Like the versions of the characters in Lord of the Rings movies are fairly different than the versions in the books, but their spirit is the same. I think that's the thing you can kind of keep in Legends when you look at Legends versus canon is just kind of like even though those stories technically don't connect to anything they're making currently, there's still a spirit there of the characters which should fall in line with some of the things you know of them from their canon counterparts. And again, the original 6 movies and the Clone Wars are all Legends up to the end of Clone Wars season 6. So there is still a lot of like Star Wars to be grounded in Legends that like you can still treat as a true continuation of that specific style of Star Wars storytelling. But yeah, truly looking at mythology is a good way of comparing it. Looking at it as just an alternate history, looking at it as a what if. I mean, especially with comparing it to canon, right? Like Luke dies so fast in canon versus Legends. He keeps going on forever and ever and ever, right? Like there are things that are extremely different about both continuities to the point where it can be you could look at New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, those types of things as what if Luke was to have lived on past that moment with Ben Solo? What if we got to see Luke at kind of full power? There you go. You got stories and legends, like different things that are slightly different or majorly different than things in canon. You could see an alternate take, an alternate idea in legends. And also, look at a take that's a little less restrained than things in canon, because a lot of the big ideas in canon have been thrown in TV and film, not as much in books. Legends kind of had that because George Lucas, and we've been talking about it all stream, the Darth Talon thing. Darth Talon originally appeared in the Star Wars Legacy comics, which take place over 100 years after Episode 6. So, and George Lucas was going to say, well, who cares about that? I'm just going to put her in my sequels. And so George treated Legends as this playground for people to come and do whatever they wanted, and tell stories that they wanted to tell. And he rarely restricted their storytelling, but he also decided that if he wanted to overrule something, they were just going to have to deal with it. And that happened multiple times through Legends. So yeah, she never meets Maul. She actually never meets Maul ever in Legends. He was just going to pluck her because he liked the design and he was interested in the character and he knew she was popular, and pull her back into the timeline and place her in his Star Wars sequel stories, which also probably would have retconned most of New Jedi Order and retconned most of Legacy of the Force and all that type of stuff. So he was going to do that, and just never really explain it, and then it would be up to the authors to explain that. So that's some of the stuff with Legends too. You can see all these different random kind of takes, but it is kind of more of an Elseworlds thing, especially when it came to connecting with the movies and the different eras. But if you're interested in Star Wars history, I think there's a lot of really good value in Legends, especially as somebody who's only been a canon person. But if, like Senex said, if you prefer one continuity to the other, if you just can't get past the fact that they don't connect to the current crop of movies and TV, canon has like 70 books or something now. Like there's a ton to dive into, and there's a lot of really good ones. So make sure you check those out as well. All right, we're gonna wrap up the stream tonight. Said it was gonna be a shorter one, and of course it's super long again, but that is because of you guys. We really appreciate the comments and the questions and all of that, and we love discussing Star Wars with you all. So thank you for tuning in, excuse me, again, and for turning up with your questions and interacting with us. We always love that and appreciate you guys for showing up. So thanks for the questions. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the discussion tonight. Appreciate everyone. We'll be back next week for another stream. Keep your questions that didn't get answered and bring them back for next stream. HD GameTube says, thanks for the stream. Make the next one 500 hours, please. We will try to get it as close to that as possible. Probably max is 2 hours. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes next week. But thank you so much for joining us again, everybody, tonight. Really appreciate it. Check out the content we've been putting out recently. Again, shorts are coming out twice a week. We got polls twice a day, every single day, and then videos. This week there will be. I've had a lot of questions, and speaking about Legends, I had a lot of questions on my last video that I made for the Legends timeline when the next episode was coming out. I can't believe it's almost been a year actually since I posted on that. So I have the next episode will be out this week, so you can check that out. We are currently reading and close to reviewing Outlaws Low Red Moon, so we will have a review out for you all before the book comes out next week. You can check that review out and see if you think you should read Outlaws Low Red Moon. It will be a non-spoiler review. Keep an eye out for that one as well. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we will see you all next week.